never impoverished. And I will say, think about that just on a real level. What does it mean to be Mamlechas Kohen? What does it mean to be a Kohen Gadol? What does it mean to be a Melech? It means that no matter what I do in life, I can never become spiritually impoverished. I can make a lot of mistakes, make a lot of wrongs, do a lot of things that really mess me up and mess up my life. And take me off the rails. But at the end of the day, I'm never impoverished. At the end of the day, the personalistic spiritual coffers are never empty. There's always something in the tank. There's always something in the soul. And that's because this expression during this season. A lot of times we come to Ramadan and we're so, you know, myself. It's like this a solution to this. So it's very important to somewhere to get started. Well, just remember, you're playing Gadol. Just remember that you're a melech. And both of those individuals never taste impoverishment. Right? There's always something there. There's always eternal wealth. No matter how badly you've messed up, you always have the ability and the spiritual credit to be able to affect the turnaround. So incredible. This is a fascinating case. What happens if the king gets Sarah? So now, here's what we've established. So just see us appreciate the circle over here, right? What have we established? That at least the king and the Nasi and the Kohen Gadol don't bring a cover over the Yored, right? Why don't they bring a cover over the Yored? Because during a cover over the Yored, you have to be able to experience poverty. Now remember again, let's go first to the circle. That's why the Mishnah says they're not subject to their unique commandments when it comes to these kids that are in the floor. Yes, called you must make us take because those are Avedas for which the liability is covered over the Yored. So therefore, they're not subject to this. Now we're asking three follow-up questions. What happens if the king gets Saras? Everyone said, now what is that? And again, if the king gets Saras, he can't be king. Rashi points out that we are not teaching Sarah, but Rabbi You can't teach him while he plants. Doesn't mean you can't go ahead and listen to the flow. It's really fast. And you can't act like the king. Why did it for us? Why did it for us? Because you did something. You did something. So you can't go ahead and be the leader of the people if you yourself are not modeling the right kind of behavior.
Baby, look at this athleticism. This is really unprecedented. Look at this move. Look at this move. Look at this move. Is the king paying for this from his money or from your money? Right? So, what does this mean? So the thing is like this. Essentially, one of the advantages of being king is obviously king goes with power. The king also comes with opportunities for personal financial advancement. Now, both say it's fascinating. The notion
obviously because it's teaching them about the nicer. So the Gemara just says that he's wealthy. He's going to be wealthy because he's king and his own personal finances have generated tremendous amount of wealth also. So just because he's not actually a king, the fact that he was king, obviously most probably endowed him with tremendous personal wealth, and therefore Allah for myself. He is always partner from partner from the videos. It's incredible. Kind of the people that see a partner to us. Ultimately, a really kind of
Who the fuck is sharing this?
And the people on the ship partner who on the right hand side. We covered over the yard. It's the exact covered Aaron about on the shop ourselves. I see it say, but the only Habiti train us here. The Habiti Bala for the Ferris Paulo. I see it say for all of the Yori. Well, Paulo for us. Suppose it's interesting to be my sense of the people said. Anytime you come over the your rate, you can go over the partner. So you must I'm not going to keep up. What can you keep as logic? I'm going to throw, and we'll say, point out. When you say partner, you say that, like I say it again. When you say partner, remember, I'm just talking application is implementing data. So, because liability and everything in that data. Partner over here is equal to very we discussed a particular carbonic liability. So therefore, a coin level is partner from carbon over the others. Okay, so what's the part? I'm going to talk that carbon out of the bond. So this is the carbon ultimately of iron in this size. I will say this is referring to the Habite coin level. Like it's referring to unique carbon of the coin level. Zoom bar for us. This is this kind of a carbon. This is the one that is obligatory. And the other one is not. I the emo to might be that one of double dollars. So maybe we can look. So maybe in the world of yoga, maybe the kind of simply exempt from the lowest tier carbon. What is that? In my movie, you know, so what is that? A serious side effect. That's what I'm saying. Again, like the lowest level meal. Our new spouse is from the maybe higher levels of already or rate class of another should be higher which was the most I like it says the key fellow of point a share cut so a share cut me Athos Neira. And the scatter the Athos is scatter the cooler. One who could achieve atonement from anyone of these achieve atonement to all of them. In this scatter the Athos, in this scatter the cooler. So essentially again, the only thing we can be tied in all of the yoga is you can be tied to any of the extreme forms of the carbon. But again, once you're not subject to poverty, by definition, ultimately again you're not subject to the lowest level. So it's most of not having anything. On the other side, the Hayot Yesh on the Achas Ne'ila. And I'm because it's kind of Achas inside the country. You can brush over here by these customers. But by the Hayot Yesh on the Achas Ne'ila, so we only have liability for the whole week, we have liability for any one of them. You might say, in this kind of Achas, in this kind of Kuran, you must Allah mature liability that the people own the people says, Nasi Chayiv Pushnish Niyas Kos. Remember, it's not true. But the people says that ultimately, again, he does have liability. It's too much Nikas Vikadata. He does have liability in the case Vasari. Only is exempt from Niyas Kos. So you see, that's not true because of the Abayi merges. Abayi Me'achos Mashmalei, La'achos Lo Mashmalei. He doesn't Me'achos, he doesn't La'achos. He might from Me'achos to Mashmal. Why does he from Me'achos? Because he Rahman of the Basot, Shabi Asir Seifa. Because that's the life is at the end of Asir Seifa, which is the lowest level over the yoga. Remember, the problem is Kai Asir Seifa and the Kai Bisulan. Since you only if you're higher than the lowest level, or you put yourself at the lowest level over the yoga, you'll be deprived of everything. You say that actually, Kai Asir Seifa is Kai Bisulan, so that you think that even if you're not subject to one of the levels of over the yoga, you should still be subject to the other ones. If that's the case, Nikhile Lachaim, Asas, Ne'ila, the Doubtless. Then write that question again by Doubtless, by the lowest level carbon, Inam is Ashir, or by the highest level of Ashir. Back then it doesn't write it by one of the poles, but ultimately kind of writes it in the middle, indicates to us, the only thing you're kind of covered over the yoga is that you can be subject to all shades of over the yoga. But if someone is never subject to poverty, and therefore can never reach the lowest level over the yoga, therefore they're not subject to any incredible. In the both sides, bottom line, take away message over here. Allah again, coin double, and we talking as well. Nasi King are not subject to poverty over the yoga. Again, Sanhedrin goes without saying they're subject to poverty. Really sorry, everything necessary.
So because they're subject to only the yoga, therefore halacha myself, it will not bring their unique karbanos in these aforementioned cases of Shmias Kol, Itris Hasayim, Tumas Mikdash V'Kadash. But stated a little bit differently as a definitive rule. The only time Sanhedrin, Kohen Gadol, should bring their unique offering or erroneous ruling is in a case where the individual would be subject to a karban. That's it. If the individual is subject to a different karban, they're not bringing, quote unquote, they're not bringing their unique karban. Mishnah. Mishnah Shabbatalish, Hayavan Aznon Kaz, actually doesn't happen. So let's say here is Hayofid maybe dispose here. Both is actually interesting Mishnah of general halacha regarding Kabbalah. And it's many out there, really. And out there in the Torah, that ultimately, again, if performed intentionally, would carry with a punishment of Christ. And ultimately, again, an unintentional violation would bring a covered katos. So again, I will say when the individual brings his katos, what is the katos? Maybe kispa usira. So ultimately, again, the individual will bring his keep or adult. That's a katos, his keep or adult. But rule one. In that same case, hanasi seer. If the king went ahead and issued an erroneous ruling, and then followed through on it, the king would bring a seer. That's the king's unique offering. Mashiach will ultimately again, Kohen Gadol, they issue an erroneous ruling and people follow through on it, they bring their part. So we'll say that's the type of case. Right? That's the paradigm that we've been operating with this entire Masechta. Yeah. What about ROTHSCHILD? What about in the case of bless you? What about in the case of Avodah Hayofid v'hanasi v'Mashiach v'Din Sira. So in the case of Avodah ultimately again, the individual, the Nasi, and the Kohen Gadol all bring the Sira. They bring high the Sira. They can bring a par and the Sira. Okay? Really, like they bring the par and the Sira. Par the Ola, the Sira the Katos, a par for an Ola, the Sira ultimately for a Katos. Hashem Talmud, what about Hashem Talmud? Because it's really good Mishnah, because this is like a compilation about Hashem Talmud. No, you're listening, it's a single thing. That is, depends on the financial status. And Yofi, Vanesi Hayafis. Those things, I just want to point out something. It's like a hashkafa of an Hashem Talmud. I would say, think to yourself, I don't know, it seems insensitive. Why not go ahead and just say, you know, everyone brings the same carbon, but after all, why make people feel this one has more, this one has less? They will say, do you know one of the most important sodos in Yiddishkeit? I'm not saying the most important stuff. It's important to say is you have to understand in life, some people have more and some people have less. Sometimes we become so preoccupied with people's feelings that we put feelings above reality. And we feel like we have to coddle everyone. Everyone has to be coddled. No, that's a shame. You should never be aware that someone has more than you. Yeah, but people have more than you. People have more than you, people have less than you, and that's just the way the world works. It's the same way, by the way, that in life, there are winners and there are losers, right? And that's the way life works, and that's why when, you know, you give every single child a trophy, and suddenly again, you know, there's first to 172nd place, and everybody gets a ribbon, right? It's profoundly detrimental to life, because it's important for children to understand, ultimately again, that there are winners, there are losers. Just like I will say, you know, some friends, you know, even effort sometimes to like, you know, regulate the types of secrets that people make. Yeah, we can all be moderate in what it is that we do. But this mentioned that, you know, this was going to have this, there's people who have more, there are people who have less, there are people who make bigger sins, there's people who make smaller sins, there's people that take less education, people that take less education. And again, so much of life is just being comfortable in your own skin, even if you can't do what everyone else is doing. It's okay. It's okay. I can try to give you exactly what I need. You know, what I'll try to have more, but even if I can't, I'm good. I was like the hashkafa of Hashem Talmud is, yeah, you know what? Ruben has more money than I do. So he's going to bring a nicer carbon. I have lesser money. Doesn't make me a lesser person. And so much of my life is trying to be basically usher Hasanet the Talmud. You know, there's like Hashem Talmud. When I was Hashem Talmud, so you might say, ultimately again, Hashem and Hashem Talmud. So So the Yachid individual and the Nasi are both chayiv in that. Interesting, that's not focused on the previous. That's not focused on the previous picture. Mashiach is based in truth. But ultimately, again, Mashiach, this is the point of those, and the based in a pattern, Hashem V'adayin, what about Hashem V'adayin? Hayachid V'hanasi V'Mashiach Hayach. Everyone is striving in Hashem V'adayin. The based in to it. The based in does not do that. Ashmiya Sakov, Abichoi Sasai, Matumas Mutas Shikadashem. So we'll say, so again, going back to, harkening back to last Mishnah, like Shmiya Sakov. So again, someone makes a shua, I affirm it. People assign a shua of articulation. Tumas mikdash v'kadasha, issues that tuma either in the mikdash or individuals entering into the mikdash. Basic too, which means again, it's basic issue we're using regarding any of these things. Ultimately, again, their partner. V'yokim v'nasi Mashiach hayavim. And ultimately, again, Yoshid nasi Mashiach hashayi elo she'ein kan gadol Mashiach. And ultimately, again, the Shimon says that the Kohen is not chayiv for any rule in his rendering like Tumas Mikdash V'Kadasha. He wants to remind them what carbon do they bring. So he wants to come over the way to the was over Hanasi maybe Sawyer. Okay, kind of on one side. So this is a really nice Mishnah that is a little bit of like a catch-all of all the information we're giving to Torah. So Tanya, Rabbi Shimon says as follows: Rabbi Shimon Yanosin Klau, Kol Shayach B'Ashem Talui, Hanasi Kiyosibo. Rabbi Shimon says give the following principle: anytime an individual is having an Ashem Talui, the Nasi will also be chayiv. The Nasi Kiyosibo, Mashiach will be instituted. And Mashiach means very important. That's pretty much in line with what we said in the picture, with the exception of Nasi. So Choshu Ba'Ashem Dadai, anytime the individual is having an Ashem Dadai, Nasi Mashiach will be able to buy an sorry. So Choshu Ashem Dadai, anytime the individual is having an Ashem Dadai, so Nasi Mashiach Yossi, and Nasi Mashiach will do the same thing. If it is into, it's very important. Shmiya Sakol will be to Sasam Tumas Mikdash V'Kadasha. Those cases we just mentioned before. What's that? From page 2, page in this chapter, Nasi Mashiach Hayavim. And Nasi Mashiach will be chayiv. Elo, Shema Nasi chayiv Shmiya Sakol. Nasi is not chayiv Shmiya Sakol, as we spoke about before. Why not? Because remember again, that's a matter of testimony, and the king has nothing to do with testimony. But Mashiach Tumas Mikdash V'Kadasha, and Kohen Gadol doesn't have liability regarding matters of community based on the The whole shiva over the Yolei, anytime you send it to over the Yolei, Nasi Kiyotivo, right? So the individuals have over the Yolei, Nasi shares the same halacha. Mashiach will be in Turin, and Mashiach will be about the I say, you know, a second, how do the Kasha? It's a contradiction. I'm the same Mashiach, I because we got Shekadasha. You said before that the Mashiach is not chayiv. Into Mashiach Shekadasha, it's too much Shekadasha to the potter. About the Shmiya Sakol of the Sasai chayiv. And most remember again, these things are normally considered to be agreed. So when you're making it sound like it's too much Shekadasha, the Nasi is potter. But the other part of it, namely Shmiya Sakol, B2 Sasayim, the Nasi will be chayiv. Lord, 1 second. In a sefer, Kol Shuba over the Yorei Nasi Kiyotzivo, Mashiach will be in Turin. Hatani, Mashiach will be in Turin. And we say, not basic Turin, just like the basic covered all of these cases, meaning again, Shmiya's called B2 Sasayim, Tumas Mikdash V'Kadasha, Mashiach Turin. So to the connotation of prosperity, that's a contradicted with this is like the point of his liability. You might say, on the base, contradiction. No, it's not a contradiction. And the Dallas, is talking about two different cases. One is talking about the lowest level of carbon over the Yolei, and one is talking about, again, not the lowest level, but actually Dallas means the impoverished of the impoverished. So that's what he says over here, Mashiach Hotan Ikulis, the city Yekab Arrow, Sheina Karetz Baal Lachol. I become a Mashiach Chayiv, the Shmiya Skolim, the Dallas becomes mayor. Most is very interesting. According to the Torah, the most yesterday, in Halacha L'Maisa, when we exempt the Kohen Gadol, he is exempted ultimately again from the lowest level covered over the Yolei, but may be subject to certain higher levels of covered over the Yolei. So it's interesting we sheep over there, because beforehand, we've seen either you're Chayvin covered over the Yolei, or you're Patur covered over the Yolei. So here there might be a hybrid model where maybe you're Chayv in certain parts of over the Yolei or certain levels, but not subject to others. Interesting. interesting. Rabbi Shimon Sabla Rabbi Kiva, but how do you Machado? So Rabbi Shimon was Rabbi Kiva one piece, and I'm saying one piece. Sabla Rabbi Kiva, but Dali Dallas, the Potter, the Kavod Dali Dallas. Here, you Rabbi Kiva, that ultimately again, he is Pasha in the lowest level of all level of rate, but argues on him in the higher levels. Rabbi Akiva ultimately says that in the subject, ultimately, Rabbi Shimon says, they know a Kohen Gadol is totally exempt from a covenant over the world. Incredible. Alice, in Kohen Gadol, how much is this? My congregation. What is Shimmon's logic? That a Kohen Gadol is what's his logic? It's true. In this first time, that I shall really kill Hakah. The Pasuk says it's because this individual will cut off from the cow. This refers ultimately again to someone whose carbon is the same as the cow's carbon. Yet says that in carbon of several cows. Comes to exclude one whose carbon is not like the rest of the cow. Ultimately, again, what we use that. That's the plain level. Plain level. In pain, Nasi Nami in carbon of several cows. I but one second, but the Nasi also, like the thing also has a different carbon than the cow. So the Gemara says, right, so what's this? I'm sorry, just to be clear. So remember, we're not talking about over here, we're not talking about over here, that halacha one stuff, that Shimon says, that Shimon says, that a Kohen Gadol is not tied into much nefesh mekadash. That's what we're focusing on here. So now again, just let's go back to this in a second. So my congregation, and why does Shimon say that halacha one stuff, Kohen Gadol is not subject to too much nefesh mekadash? It says that ultimately again, for in practice, the thing that is in colors. What are we got from here? Who's liable for this? Someone whose carbon is the same as everyone else's carbon. Yod says that she'in kavanah shavel cow. This comes to exclude ultimately again someone whose carbon is not like the cow. Now Rashi understands this to mean that it's talking about someone who is accounted for together with the cow. But our success is in the same carbon. Nasi is not in kavanah shavel cow. That's not included. Because the Nasi's carbon is not like the seagull's carbon, which the Gemara says, which was Shabbat, the Kahara, or at least the Nasi is the same as Klal Yisrael. Why is very interesting? Because the Nasi is included with the general atonement of Klal Yisrael on the Kippur. So in that respect, there is some carbonic symmetry between the Nasi and the rest of Klal Yisrael. He's at least included ultimately again in the covenant of Klal Yisrael, about Klal Yisrael, to which the Gemara says, "In came Kohanim Nami Lo Shavu L'Kal to Kafar Yom Kippurim." The Gemara said, "Kohanim Shavu L'Kal B'Shar Mitzvahs T'Shana." So if that's the case, one second. Here's the issue. Here's the issue. Kohanim ultimately are not the same as the cows. Like Kafar Yom Kippur, because remember again, Kohanim have their own Kafar of Yom Kippur. It's true, but Kohanim shovel the cow to shine mitzvahs to the Shana Kula. Kohanim at least are the same as Klal Yisrael because they are the same in terms of other forms of atonement throughout the year. Mashiach Nami har shovel the shine mitzvahs to Shana. Father, again, the Mashiach is ultimately also just like Christ and other mitzvahs throughout the year. Ela Morava Ima Haki, and say the following: Misha Kakaso Shavel Yechidim. Ultimately, again, who does it refer to? Someone whose Kakaso is ultimately the same as individuals, or non-individual, and who is that? The cow. So essentially, one of those things is going to be subject to too much nefesh mekadash. Only so he shares the same type of liability as the cow. Ultimately, again, therefore the point who does not is therefore going to be touched by too much nefesh mekadash. Okay, incredible. The Lezer Omer Nasi may be sealed. So again, the Lezer says that the Nasi brings a seal. Omer Lezer. Elo b'tumas nefesh mekadash. Ultimately, the Lezer she goes on to regarding tumas nefesh mekadash. Why? However, the Nehemar Koris both kibikapuah. There's ultimately again, since Koris is mentioned there, is treated like a chatas kavua, ultimately not like a cover over the array. Therefore, there will be light. These are like the Lezer Shurim Kamar, because you think the Lezer is talking about everything, he's referring to all of the cases. So the Gemara says, Nifti, Seir, Nasi, Ukhan Mashiach, and Mokom, Yochid Lechatas. So the Gemara says, you are this moment. It's Seir Nasi, right? And the time of the Mashiach are the equivalent functionality and then of the Chatas of the individual. Nifti Nami, Mashiach may be power, the Shmias called the B'Yis Vasai. So saying that assuming that the individual brings this problem, the Mashiach will be Mahar, Hashmias Kolabidus Vasayim. Hello, the low cut from the Mashiach. In fact, there doesn't make any mention of the point of what is here. Mamino Atumas Mitzvah Shvikadasha Koy to Mashiach Potter. It must be talking about Tumas Mitzvah Shvikadasha, for which, as we said before, ultimately again, before the Mashiach is going to be Potter. Because the Bible says, come over the way. I'm going to bring the Rav Nasser to the Papa. How do you know this? Zilma, the Lord implies everyone was talking about all of the cases. And Mashiach and Yekiva. And by point of it, he holds it from Yekiva. Meaning what the Amar, Mashiach taught the Kiva.
Look at this. I thought it says some sun.
There's nothing more to discuss about this. Already open up. More than another, She'ain maybe Asham. And the Lord agrees that Halacha myself, since a Nasi ultimately again doesn't bring outside. He agrees that a Nasi does not bring Asham Talois, but to must make us take Hadasham. So Tani Kamigashishas, Asham Talois, not to must make us take Hadasham. You bring Asham Talois, but to must make us take Hadasham. Allah is all about money. So we could bring with that. But so Allah with Allah, Holo Benema, Bokaris, Kikabua, might seem Nasi Sikir Allah. Since ultimately again, to must make us take Hadasham. Has it been a place? Even though again, the punishment is a cover over the Yoreh, but we treat it as something that has a Chatas Kavua. Because it would be treated as a Chatas Kavua, therefore what? Therefore the Nasi should be tired. The Nasi should be tired. Ultimately, again, I'm a whole of a person of what? Nice Nasi Siada. I come up with open on Mojo Below the Shim Yasham Tavoi. For a second, I'm going to say what? The Lester agrees that he does not bring it Yasham Tavoi, to which the Gemara says, Kasha. You're right, it's a contradiction. We're not sure what to do with that. And kind of what I was saying. So again, takeaways, right? Takeaways. So let's say, number one takeaway is there's nothing more beautiful than learning Torah Lishma. Right? That is the most important takeaway. But it's just understanding what has happened over here. Just understand. You're not may be a complete blank slate. But just understand that your neshama has just spent 40 minutes learning all about Kabbalah, which means that for the last 40 minutes, my neshama was residing within the walls of this house. So if you feel a ridiculous, overwhelming sense of eternal simcha, and you do not know where that is coming from, that's because for the last 40 minutes, your neshama was inside the base of the even though your mind was counting ceiling tiles. Right? But again, it's okay. But remember, that's what this is. That's all what this is. Just like I was saying, sometimes you may be sitting with someone who you love very much and you're in a conversation, and then when the conversation is over, perhaps you have no idea what the conversation was about. That may or may not happen. Right? You have no idea what the conversation was about. But you know what? It still feels so good because I'm sitting with someone who I love very much. And the neshama knows that the relationship just became so much stronger. That's what happened over the course of our last few minutes. And but again, in all seriousness, keep our principles. Our principles are every simply emerge now. And by the way, tomorrow, coming attractions, some beautiful Agartha, some great halacha. But remember, again, I'm actually going to see, I'm going to try to, there must be also like a table that totalizes all of these halachas. But again, I will say, remember, pieces of imitation that we emerged from today, individual, right? Whatever the individual brings, and chatos, halacha, that is when the nasi, the sanhedrin, and the kohen are bringing their unique kabbalas. If the individuals bring their asham taloi, ultimately, again, they are exempt from their unique kabbalas. That's pretty much everything today in a nutshell. It is, again, only machlokes is a nasi subject to covered over the already. That's the fundamental machlokes. But let's say, Hajj Allah, Holy for Mashiach, that's what I'm saying. Not to talk about the journey tomorrow. I can't remember the day there. I never watched that Page Frequency documentary or whatever it was, where it exposes all like the lies of his, like before I met him. Because I met him and I said, oh, this is a guy, Chappelle Lacey opens for like, I had a clean slate as far as meeting him, so he just seemed pretty normal to me. And I didn't have an incentive once the subreddit like attacked me for like appearing in his world. I was like, oh, these are crazy people. So why would I seek out more information about this person when I feel unfairly attacked?
I think, and
oh my god, this lies my opinions are black.
By the way, the chat is saying that you guys are on Baja. Thanks, chat. I think that you guys have a great idea as a reality show. I would watch that, but my thing has always been documentary on specifically the Greco Pop, because that is like the most important aspect of his work. I want to work. I'm being serious. I want to work as. I was talking to Adam Sandler and Yasiel Puig the other day about this. We were discussing ideas and all that. And you're like, yeah, you got to do this. Like, this is your thing. So that's something. But I do think that the main thing.
Good morning. Let's begin. I was here this morning dedicated. I called Kathy Pollock.
Who wrote the stuff? Like, how did he come up with the jokes?
Memory of
like, what is people's reaction to it? And then obviously Bob comes in and we interview him at some point, or the director does.
I would like to contribute some things. Like I could add a few key, not everything, but I go like, I was there for the conversations where, I'm.
Sorry about that. I'm how are you?
Like you're sending it's difficult because I edited for Brendan. I learned how to edit for Brendan, and I was the normal paid editor. I was having trouble editing clips down to 90 seconds.
Even though we know that they
and I would treat them
remembering all tragedies of problems thrown. All tragedies of problems thrown. Nevertheless, this is a day that was designated.
So I did have a little bit of
also remember the scope. So therefore, again, whatever one's religious feelings are, so somewhat irrelevant.
In his head, a stand-up comedy special
is funnier. Remember such an incredible, overwhelming quota of comments of 6 months devotion requires us to dedicate. I will learn this morning. The Hebrew Mishnah for 6 morning devotion and focus on Shamas Ma'at Raviyah, Mishnah Ner Hashem, all each of them individually and then to so let's begin. Your days on the Aleph, first word. So the Gemara asks, was there really Shalom? Remember, again, speak up a little bit. The Gemara beforehand was discussing the idea that in Yehoachaz was, or just Yehoachaz was anointed with Shalom Mishka. So the Gemara asks, was there Shalom Mishka in the times of Yehoachaz? After all, the Gemara says, Niknas Shalom Mishka, when the Aron was hidden away. Shalom Mishka was also hidden away. This is actually fascinating, right? So, speaking about all of the things that were hidden away in anticipation of the destruction of the first place Hamikdash. So when the Aron was hidden, the Shalom Mishka was hidden. It's in Sarah's Hamar, was the jar of mud that was kept in the Aron. Umaklo Shal Aron, the staff of Aron, with its almonds and its flowers. The Argos Shashal the Krishna Dharma Yisrael. And including in that, of course, was the Argos, the box, in which the Krishna sent to gift to Abi Shalom, referring to Shanamar, the Esklea Zava Shashirosima Shal, Asinu Ba'argos Mitzidok, Shirakta also Bahaba. So it says it's referring to when the sons of Eve took the Aron out to war with Klal Yisrael, and they were defeated by the Christians. Krishna not only defeated Klal Yisrael, but they also went ahead and took the Aron captive. This is the famous Ma'aseh Navi, where wherever they took the Aron, there was an incredible outbreak of diarrhea and hemorrhoids to the point that the Christian said, thanks to notice, they sent back the Aron, and together with John, they sent back a gift of gold. That gold was kept together with the Aron. So the Gemara is saying, when they hid away the Aron, they knew that gold as well. And who hid the Aron? Yoshio Melech Yehuda. Yoshio the king of Yehuda went ahead and hid it away. Why? Because it's not a passage that said, Yoshio saw the writing on the wall, so it's going to be a dog. And he saw the writing on the wall, but it's going to be destroyed. And as such, he did not want these items falling into our hands, and therefore he went ahead and therefore Tziba Baganzi Shreamar, I remember the Rabbi and the Rabbi of Israel, Hasloshim Hashem, through us, Allah Kodesh, the Device, Shabbat Shlomo Ben Melech Israel. So apparently, Melech built subterranean chambers in the first place Hamikdash. But then he built in anticipation of its destruction, or he built it for some other reason. The point is, there are subterranean their subterranean chambers in the Senate. So Yoshio gives the command to redeem hide the Aron as well as all these other things. And some of the subterranean processes tells us is, and it's from Gemara, that the Aron HaBris is in Harabais, somewhere there, somewhere buried in Harabais itself, waiting ultimately, again, I guess, for Mashiach to come to the nearest location. So the Gemara, Eloch and Masa, Bakase, Ato Iglas Hashem Elokeichem Es Amo Yisrael. What's it? It's a beautiful passage. So Yoshio tells the Levim, you no longer have any Avoda Bakase. Avoda Bakase means what? You're not to carry anything. There's no longer anything to carry. But what is your job? So if you as Hashem Elokeichem Es Amo Yisrael. What's your job? To be an Eved Hashem and to be an Eved Klal Yisrael. Just because you don't have your responsibilities, goes back to what we saw 2 days ago, right? About the idea that any form of leadership is needed from an obvious. You don't carry the army anymore now. It's fine. You never talk in front of you, never talk. So I'm going to Asya, you want me to speak here, from Asya Sham Sham, Asya Mishmeret Mishmeret, Asya Doros Doros. That's the ultimate meaning of Shabbat. Between all of these items listed above, to teach us that just as the Aron was hidden, so too all of these items were hidden as well. So I said, therefore again, we come back to our original question. How could you tell me that Yehoachaz was anointed Shemana Mishcha because of his older brother Yehoiakim, when at the end of the day there is no more Shemana Mishcha by this point, right? First the Gemara answers, Papa, Ba'afar Simagafla. Right, it was like, there is no Shemana Mishcha, but instead he was anointed ultimately again with balsam oil. Balsam oil, okay? So the Shemana Mishcha, also remember again, he mentioned that he also was anointed with balsam oil, Shemana Farsmon, Shaul. Why? Because Shaul was out of the two mountains, he always went to come from Judah. Shaul was from a tribe. So Shemana Farsmon, I must say, represents the anointing, but we'll call it the more temporal anointing. So the Gemara was like, Tanakh, these Gemaras are amazing. Rabbi, he said Moshe can't have a lot. How do I head and anoint the king? How do you anoint the king? So commit Nathan. So the Gemara says you go and make like Nathan means like a crown. Like a crown. The Esakohanim, Kimin key. And the kind of ultimately again like a key. My Kimin key. So what's I say again? The king, you take Shemana Mishcha, you take this, you smear it around his head like a crown. How do you go ahead and anoint the Kohanim? My community, and Rav Nashri Abagad does make coffee about it, like the Greek cup. Now, if you look at Rashi, Rashi has over here, coffee bunny speaking. Rashi has it looking like a letter S. Also, the way that it looks, by the way, according to Rashi, is, to give you a visual here, you start between the eyes, and essentially when you straight the Shemana Mishcha down up to the head, all the way down to the neck. So it's like a fess. It's like a fess. Obviously, it looks a little bit more like a cup. So but you get the point over here, you're starting at the front of the head, and you're smearing the oil all the way to the back of the head. Nani Chada, the Tzilah Moshe, Shemana Rosho. So we're going to see now the 15 accounts. According to one account, we go ahead and we pour the shaman on his head first, and then afterwards we put it between his eyes. Even though shaman, then we say it. Different verses says, no, first we put the shaman between his eyes, and then we go ahead and we pour it on his head. Tonight, since my focus now about the proper order, we know that anointing requires both pouring as well as putting oil between the eyes. This is my focus apparently again, which is the proper order. So some say, again, I will say that the anointing between the eyes is the most important part, and others say no, it is the pouring of the oil on the head that is the most important part. My time is the man the Amar you'd seek God. They'll say, what is the reason for the opinion of these guys that the pouring is most important? But to say, Vayitzok Mishemet HaMishcha Al Rosh Aaron, Vayimshach also. Let's not show. We'll say, because again, the pasuk itself says what? Vayitzok first. The pasuk itself says, you pour the oil before you anoint the oil, or you dab the oil, you smear the oil. So see that it's more important. The opinion says that no, the smearing is more important.
Kasavar Shechin Akamotzi in such shots. He says, remembering in a website, that Yitzika pouring of oil is something you not only find by the Kohen, but you also find by what? By the king. The fact that the utensils are also anointed with pouring tells us that pouring is the dominant form of inauguration. So you must see by Yitzhak or so by Yitzhak. And here's the problem. The order in the pasuk is first by Yitzhak pour, and then by Yitzhak anoint. Let's see what the Lord needs to say. Why is it
It's really unprecedented. Where is he? Baby, I've never seen anything more unprecedented. Where is he?
Two parts to the anointing.
Dog.
One is the pouring of the oil.
Now this motherfucker's gonna learn about how to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. Why? Why the fuck not? People be like, motherfucker, you know everything about the beginning of this bitch, but now when you get this thing self duct tape, you be like, yeah, bitch, and you love it. Be like, no, we don't. It sucks. And be like, get over it. I got a teleporter in this bitch. Really? Maybe. Why? Like you assholes can't even get a working website. Your shit sucks. Yo, dog. This should have been a Mikdash. Boring. This shit sucks. Give me some Jew, bitch.
So what's
The miracle girls brought mitzvahs to sing. Really? I'm the toughest motherfucker you'll ever be.
Listen to this beautiful Gemara. Let's listen to this. There are two droplets of Shemin HaMishkan that were constantly hanging on the edge of Aaron's beard. Let's say when the Aaron was taught, so the droplets would like roll up the beard of the one, so they wouldn't fall off as he was talking. So two droplets of Shemin HaMishkan that sit on the edge of his beard, and when he would talk, they would roll up. The Al-Davar is that, how your motion drive, we'll discuss it similarly. The Al-Davar is that, how your motion drive, and we'll say, dividing these two droplets, Moshe Rabbeinu was always good, always good. Was his second wife on your base in David. Maybe I committed what is it? So maybe I applied too much Shemin HaMishkan, and therefore again it constitutes an act of Megillah. Remember again, what's Megillah? Megillah is physical or mundane use of consecrated property. So the Gemara says, so ultimately again, the Baskol comes out and says, the Shemin HaTov, like the wood oil, Kal Chermon. And again, what's the Gemara, the pasuk compares. The pasuk compares. This is the very next pasuk. This is all in Kapitel Taflan of Gimel 133. It says, "Kital Chemon Shiorei B'Haritzio," like the dew of the thermol, which falls down in Haritzio. So what's the comparison between the oil and Tal Chemon and the dew? Matal Chemon in Bomigila, Akshan Amishra Shabizak Hara in Bomigila. Just like the Rosai, there is no Megillah, so too again, the Shemin HaMishkan, in the period of Aaron, there is no Megillah as well. The Adayin Haya Aaron Doeg. It's still Aaron was concerned. I'm a Shema Moshe Abalani Ma'al. Aaron says, maybe Moshe will give me the Megillah, but maybe I got some enough of the oil that was not Kohanic related. The other Sabbas called Amra, beautiful. Dine Matolu Manoim, Sheves Achim Dandaka. Ma Moshe Ma'al, Achamonah. So Pasuk says, how beautiful it is for brothers to sit together in peace. Just like Moshe Rabbeinu didn't connect with Aaron, don't worry, you didn't connect with Aaron. Again, very quickly, what's the symbolism? The Shemin HaMishkan is always sitting in the beard of Aaron. Let's say when the Shemin HaMishkan put on, applied to someone, when they're inaugurating for a new service. Shemin HaMishkan represents newness. Shemin HaMishkan represents excitement. Shemin HaMishkan represents uses for something new. Chazal were telling us what the Shemin HaMishkan always remained on the beard of Aaron. It was as moist, it was as wet as the beard was applied. To tell you that Aaron's excitement for the community Gedolah, Aaron's excitement for his Avodas Hashem was as fresh every single day as the first day he did. And ultimately, again, in incredible metaphor, the greatest challenge our youth, as I said, is not the execution of God's commandments. Generally speaking, we understand English, yes, and it's observing our greatest challenge.
Come on, you can watch this shit all the time. You can only learn about the Beit HaMikdash right now, baby.
Regardless of our coin,
Why? Because this shit fucks.
That's obvious.
Does it? It's the worst. Look at this athleticism, though. Folks, you know about athleticism? Look at this move. Look at this athleticism. Look at this. This motherfucker's not even doing it like Rambo.
Only anointed kings, well, actually, anointed kings. This literally means the only anointed kings by a man, by a spring. Kadeshet Yimashik Mafusa. What's that? Because anointing a king by a spring was like a symbolically good omen. The idea being that just like the spring flows, so too again the king's monarchy should continue to flow as well. Sheneh Tamar. Nayom HaMelech was that side, just as a total aside. If you ever go into the court of Pir David and you take the water tunnel, that's the Gihon spring. What's like that is where Klal Yisrael historically anointed Malach by the Gihon. It's an incredible thing to see you stand in that and everywhere. It's fun because you're walking through water. But more fun than walking through water was they stand on the spot where literally again Malchi Beis David were anointed. That's the spot. So the Gemara goes by the Gemara says Shneimar, V'yimar Melech Ohem Kipui Mochem Es Abi Adonechem Horar Kol Salah. Oh, good. I might close this. Was it this
place where Hashem's presence would always be felt?
Originally, I wasn't going to be here, and then when I saw this document, I can't miss this. So also listen to this. I'm going to be Ani. Hi, man, the boy leader. He must have shas yilo. Also, listen to this. If a person wanted to know they're going to live out the year or not. Now, again, please don't leave early from this before you finish this video. Right? I don't want anyone walking away with this. Listen to this. First one, so they're going to live out the year or not. So, what you do, take a candle during a ceremony of Shabbat. The base of the Lashem sake, put it in a house where there is not a strong wind. If the candle remains lit, no. If the candle remains lit, then what? Neda the Masik Shas. What's like the candle remains lit, then a person knows that they're going to live out here. So you hear this? Take a candle during a ceremony of Shabbat, place it in a home where there is not a strong wind. If the candle remains lit, you're going to live out the year. Similarly, what's that? Number one. Number two, first of all, I'm going to be successful in business. I have a particular business venture that I want to undertake. Am I going to be successful or not? And I want to know if I'm going to be successful or not successful. Literally kind of goals. Buy yourself a rooster. The rooster gets fat. The will say that's a sign you're going to be successful. Number three, I'm going on a trip and I want to know if I'm going to come back. I want to make it back or not. So what should I do? So what happens? So it's like ultimately that they go to a home that is darkened, not that it's pitch dark, but that is darkened. You see the shadow of the shadow. Then you know ultimately again that you're going to come home over there. Don't say, so just I want to point me out here. What is going on in this Gemara? Right? What is this talking about? So first of all, so the Marshal, again, I'm going to always say delicious. I think it's special. We have to do this inside. Maybe Shabbos is not the kind of little daffodil. It's just a little piece. So the Marshal says over here, he says, I don't understand. There's a biblical prohibition of Rosh Hashanah. You're not allowed to engage in forms of divination. So we don't do omens. So the Marshal says something absolutely amazing. The Marshal says, if you look at the Gemara does something dramatic. If a person wants to know if they're going to live out the year or not, so what does the Gemara say? Take a candle, put it in a home where there's not a lot of wind. And what does the Gemara say? If it stays lit, then you're going to live. We'll say, what doesn't the Gemara say? If it goes out, you're going to die. We'll say, if you notice again on each of the things mentioned in the Gemara, the only thing that's mentioned is the positive.
The Maharsha says something amazing. The default setting of life is that things are going to work out. A person has to have an expectation that things in life are going to work out, that I'm going to live, that I'm going to be successful, that I'm going to make it back home. So if I do the omen, and the omen confirms the positive outcome, then what? Well, say that's not an omen. What is that? What is that? That's life. That is an affirmation that things are good, which is the natural default mindset of the Jew. If the candle goes out, what does it mean? What does it mean? Nothing. It means nothing. It means don't pay attention to it, because again, that's an omen then. So it's like an amazing result. When the Gemara talks about these omens are here ultimately again to affirm a positive outlook on life, which is supposed to be the default outlook of the Jew. So if these omens confirm the positive outcome, fantastic. You think it says something negative, simply ignore. Don't say, so you understand, I'm not doing the Maharsha justice, it's a much longer piece. Don't say you understand the godless in this idea that is teaching us how to look at life. You know, there are some people that are always waiting for the other shoe to drop. There are some people who are just waiting for the sky to fall. Sometimes for good reason, sometimes because they had a lot of life trauma and a lot of life difficulties. Sometimes when you've been through a lot, you just expect bad stuff to happen. It's understandable, but that's not what a Kodesh Baruch Hu wants of us. Kodesh Baruch Hu wants to have a positive expectation for life, that things are good, that things will work out, that life is beautiful. That has to be the natural default. Now, most like, so you say to yourself, okay, it's easy to have that mindset if everything works out. But again, herein lies the true test of our spiritual metal. I'm supposed to have that outlook even if things don't work out. It didn't work out this time. It'll work out next time. It didn't work out for the last 25 years. It's okay. Baruch Hashem, the next 25 are going to be great. Let's say that's the power of the Jew. Have an unconquerable optimism. Have an unconquerable positive outlook on life. That's what these signs do. But let's look how the Gemara ends off. The Gemara says, "V'lav milsi." But my suggestion, the Gemara says, is don't pay attention to omens. Why? The Gemara says, "Don't machal shadaiti mistamasa." Because you know what the problem is? The problem is as beautiful as that Maharsha is. If you're that guy who lights the candle, and then what? It goes out. Suddenly, it's not going to be so easy to shake that one off. So it says, therefore, the Gemara says, you know what? You're better off just staying away from omens. Not omens, you're staying from these type of symbols in general. But let's say, yet, the Gemara says something just to pull out. It's very exciting. Rabbi, hashtag the Amrit Simna Milsi. Let's say, do you see this? This is the Gemara. So Rabbi says, now that you told me that omens are significant, not omens, but like signs are significant. Get ready for this. Let's say, this is Samach Maisa. Le'olam Yeheragio Le'mechsek L'reish Shasa. What's the name for a person? Should always look at that. If you notice again, so the girsa over here is L'mechsek. So the Hagos is being changes it to L'mechal. Was it in fact, again, this Gemara appears here in the Sefer Harias and in Edios, and we'll say two different girsas. One is L'mechsek, one is L'mechal. We'll discuss in just a moment. So Rabbi says, now that we said that's what that omens are significant, the person on Rosh Hashanah should look at or should eat krav, rubia, karsi, silky. The person should eat a gourd and a fenugreek and leeks and beets and dates. So those sides, you understand? We do this. This is Siminosa. We do this at Rosh Hashanah, right? We sit down and they go through a whole bunch of foods on Rosh Hashanah. Where does that practice come from? That is a derivative. That's the Gemara. Also, if you look at Rashi for just a moment, Rashi says over here, Rashi says, if you look, it's on the left-hand side of Rashi, about 6 lines into the short lines. Why these food items? The honey gadol adults say the shayirakas. I say Rashi says the common amongst these things is that they grow fast. They represent vitality. So we choose about this is different because the Torah brings down something different. The Torah explains that the reason we eat these items is because their names, which also we see the hiratzons. The hiratzons somehow are a play on these names. Rashi says no, the common denominator amongst these items is they grow quickly, and therefore they represent vitality. Because of that, ultimately, again, we begin Rosh Hashanah with those items. So it says something interesting. The Matter actually brings down this idea. He says, why does one Gemara say L'michsi L'mecham? What's that say? There's an incredible nafkamina. Let's say I don't like any of the symbolic foods. I don't like dates, beets, leeks, fenugreek, fish, lantern, just not my thing.
Right? I don't. So I say, so what? Which for many people that's the case. And so I say, so what happens if I don't like any of these? What do you do with it? So the Master Ephraim says there is still an inyan that each of them on the table, and to look at them and to recite the yiratzon based on the skills of the Gemara. Everyone thinks it's just the mechal, just to eat. It's not true. Even if you're not going to eat it, it is an inyan ultimately to have it. But Mechsei to look at it, incredible. It says the Gemara, "Look at Mishashi the Brave." It says the Mishashi said to his son, "People Yisum Me'al Unikmar Kamei Rabbi." When you want to come on the Torah from your Levian, Yersim Masnisa Va'alu Kamei Rabbi. What's that? Listen to this. Prepare. Learn the Mishnayos before you go to your Rebbe. Once in other words, if you want to really learn, so it says incredible. So learning requires preparation. You can't just show up to learn. A person has to prepare themselves. So he says, review your Mishnayos, and then go before your Rebbe. Yes, this is coming. And when you sit before your Rebbe, listen to this. Look at your Rebbe's mouth. Look at your Rebbe's mouth. Let's say such an application. We know that pasuk to me. That ultimately, again, we should be looking at our Rebbeim. You see, we are not to look at their lips as the words are coming out. When you learn by a river. She sounds nice. Learn by a river. Was in the same way that ultimately, again, the water flows, so your learning should flow as well. And better to sit, better to live in the garbage heap, but better to sit, I say. Live in the garbage heap, and don't live in the palaces of Let's look at guys for just a moment. The Muslim Achasia, how about we come to ruin the Rosh Harvest Yafa, about Visa of Haba Harvest Mal, the commonly Mutab no Lodder Ashbal, Muslim Achasia, you Lodder about Visa. Better to live in a garbage dump, Visa, than in a mansion, in Muslim Achasia, a mansion book. What does that mean? Apparently, Muslim Achasia was an incredible Muslim Torah. Pompadisu not as much, which is interesting, because you have to think Pompadisu was one of the major Torah cities. I guess at different points in history was different, quality was different. Better to live in a garbage heap in a Makom Torah than to live in a mansion in a place that is not a Makom Torah. Furthermore, again, better to eat. Galgana was a type of fish. Better to eat a type of fish, ultimately, this Galgana fish that's about to spoil, than to eat the kusa of Rabbi. Kusa was a higher end gift. So better to eat a fish that's almost going bad than to eat the fine dip of the kusa. Which means what? Be careful how many, what's the right word, pleasures in life you attach yourself to. Because I always say the more pleasures a person needs, the higher the material upkeep, the more difficult it is to focus on spirituality. So what he's telling his son is, better to get by on the future fish than to have to acquire the kusa. Because once you acquire the kusa, again, it's going to be a lot more materialism ultimately again to make that. So he's giving his son all of these incredible lessons. Live in a Makom Torah, even if it means living in a garbage dump. Better than going ahead and living in a mansion somewhere that's not a Makom Torah. Be careful how much materialism you build into your life. Because whatever materialism you build into your life, so we all know this, what begins as a luxury very quickly becomes a necessity. And once it becomes a necessity, you move on to the next luxury. That becomes a necessity until these things become indispensable parts of my life, which then unfortunately leads me sometimes to place an over-emphasis on my materialism and less of an emphasis on my spirituality. Beautiful. Rabbi Kari Belokai, so the pasuk says, someone else says, literally, my horn was lifted to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rabbi Kari literally, but I will say now, we assume that this horn is reference to the horn which Shemana Mishnah was speaking. My horn and not my jug. David wasn't anointed with the oil inside of the keren, inside of a horn. So their minor means Shol Bapach, but Shol and Yera wasn't anointed with oil from a pach, from a jug. Their minor means not. It's like Pash, so that means as follows. Rashi points out that a pach is earthenware. Earthenware easily cracks, as opposed to a horn, like a keren is yours. So as I said, because of that, those who are anointed from the horn their monarchy was. No one was on their monarchy was not. Hamashob B'Shan Mishka. So once we're going to go back a little bit to Gemara. So remember again, the Mishnah made a distinction between the Kohen Gadol who was anointed with Shaman HaMishcha versus the Kohen Gadol who was Meruba V'Begadol. Says the Gemara, but a Mashiach Yachol. I'm sorry, Yachol Melech. So also when it says Mashiach, so maybe Mashiach doesn't refer to the morning Mashiach. Maybe Mashiach doesn't refer to the Kohen Gadol. Maybe it refers to the Melech. Amalomar Kohen, Kohen Yachol Melech. If it says Kohen, I'm going to put that even refers to the Kohen who is anointed with the Kohanic vestments. Amalomar Mashiach. Therefore, the pasuk says Mashiach. Mashiach, Yachol Mashiach. If it just says Mashiach, I'm going to put that's even the king of Osai, who is appointed ultimately again to go to war. Also, this pasuk is talking about the special power of the Kohen Gadol. I'm going to put that even this is the Kohen going down to war. I'm going to learn the Hakol. Therefore, also the pasuk comes down and uses a distinct lashon of Hakol. Hamashiach, Shena Mashiach al Gabon, who is anointed, which means there is no one anointed above. So the Gemara says, "My mashma, the Damarava, Hayarach Hamimelech Shaliyah." Also the same way the pasuk talks about Hayarach, it means again the specific part. Yeah, it's not the Israel Kiran Nasha. Haganami Hamashiach. What is Hamashiach? Hamiduma Shemashim. Means the one who is designated amongst all those who are anointed. Because again, as we saw before, the Kohen Mashiach was also anointed. Kohen Gadol ultimately again was the unique ones amongst those who were anointed. Mashiach, Yachol Melech. So what's this? Gemara said before that if I'm going to phone the pasuk says Mashiach, maybe that refers to the king. Melech, I will do my see. Does the king, was it that the king inadvertently does something which is usher? Does he bring a power? Sir, who do I see? He brings a star. So before Shabbos, which the Gemara says, it's just I'm going to do as follows. For an accidental act, maybe he brings a sire. Al Helam Davar Yavir. Let's say in the case of Helam Davar, maybe he should have to bring a power. Kamash Lala. So we mentioned that the pasuk of Hamashiach ultimately again refers to the Kohen Gadol. Fine. In Bein Mashiach B'Shon HaMishcha. So what's the Mishnah then discusses ultimately the distinction between the Mashiach B'Shon HaMishcha, the Kohen Gadol who is anointed with oil, versus the Kohen Gadol who is Meruba V'Begadim. Masnisim Delo Rabbi Meir. We'll say our Mishnah does not reflect the view of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir, because it was Rabbi Meir, what time he said, the Meruba V'Begadim may be par, Haba Al-Kalam, it's Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir says that even Meruba V'Begadim, even the Kohen Gadol who is not a part of the Shana Mishnah, but rather is appointed because of the Kohanic vestments. So he brings a power al-Kalam, he brings the special power of the Kohen Gadol, Rabbi Meir. But the whole lot of the only Kohen who brings the special power of the Kohen Gadol, I assume, is the Kohen Gadol who is anointed with Shana Mishcha.
One of the most athletic sneezes we've ever seen, folks. One of the most famous sneezes of all time.
I only know that it refers to a Kohen who is anointed with Shana Mishcha. I don't know that it even refers to a Kohen who is anointed with clothing. Amalomar, as Kohen HaMashiach. Ultimately, again, the pasuk says, "Hakohen HaMashiach." So it's really establishing this. Like Rabbi on the base, Amos Seifa. I'll say, yeah, look at the end of that price. So, Aim Bain Kohen Mishamish Kohen Shabar. Ela Par Yom Kippurim Ba'Asira Said. Asira Saifa. I'll say, yeah, what did the end of the price say? The end of the Mishnah said, excuse me, that there is no distinction between the Kohen Mishamish. I'll say, Kohen Mishamish means the active Kohen God who was serving. The Kohen Shabar, who was the Kohen Shabar, that was the fill-in Kohen. He was the Kohen Gadol again who filled in when there was something going on with the first Kohen Gadol. So there is no distinction between the two except Par Yom Kippur, the special Par Yom Kippur, and that serious Eichel, the meal offering given by the Kohen Gadol every day. So the Gemara says, who does that reflect? Son of Rabbi Meir. That ultimately again reflects the view of Rabbi Meir. The Sanya, that probably born, Irabo, Psul, the Kohen Gadol. So listen to this. If something happened to the Kohen Gadol, there was some type of psul, and they had to remove him from office. But Umino, Kohen Acher Tachtov, and they appointed a replacement Kohen Gadol. Harishol Choser Lavgos. Also, this is actually amazing. What happened when Kohen Gadol number 1 comes back to work? What happens when he comes back to work? So what happens? So the first one has the ability to come back to work. He's now the practicing Kohen Gadol. Ba'asheni, Chomitzos HaKunalo. So the shady is still, of course, a full-fledged Kohen. The Rabbi Meir. So we'll say ultimately, again, these are the Rabbi Meir. So we'll say Rabbi Meir ultimately holds that first one The first one is like full-fledged Kohen. So but Pashtus, what that means is that he just goes back. Yeah, this is he's not a Kohen Gadol because the Mitzvah you can't have two Kohanim Gedolim, but he's just a regular Kohen. Rabbi Yossi Omer Rishon Koz Lavadoso. Rabbi Yossi says when the first Kohen Gadol is fit for service, he comes back to work. The Sheni in a roy lo the Kohen Gadol or Kohen Gadol. Wow. And what happens? The second guy will say nothing. He's not the Kohen Gadol, and he can't be a regular Kohen either. We'll discuss that in just a moment. Rabbi Yossi, Ma'aseh Yosef ben Eli. Mitzipor, we'll say this happened. There was once an episode with Yosef ben Eli, who was the Kohen Gadol. She'ira bo psul the Kohen Gadol, va'avar umino ach etakno. So what happens? So there was this episode. There was this episode of the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol got upset. And what happens was that they appointed another person. And then when the first Kohen Gadol came back to work, what happened? When the replacing Kohen Gadol, Kohen Gadol was Kohen Hedron. Well, said the replacement was now out of the job. He couldn't be a Kohen Gadol and he couldn't be a Kohen Hedron. Why not? Kohen Gadol we shouldn't be. We'll say no. In general, again, a Kohen Gadol because of animosity. You can't have two Kohanim Gedolim. It doesn't work. Right? It doesn't work. There can't be two kings. There can't be two Kohanim Gedolim. At the end of it, there has to be one warm leader. So, furthermore, Kohen Hedron, Mishum Ma'alim Bakodesh Ke'im Morid. I will say, you can't go back to being a Kohen Hedron either. Why not? Because I will say, once you've been a Kohen Gadol, you can't go back to being a Kohen Hedron. It doesn't make sense. Ma'alim Bakodesh Ke'im Morid. I will say, I don't say, based on this, they should have on the safe Rabbi. Can you tell me then they should have such deals that I've on the safe of the view Rabbi? Rabbi safe. I'm already excuse me. Rabbi Rabbi he said yes, they should have on the safe Rabbi. Yes, that is the way to utilize stuff. Yosef Amar Rabbi. Yosef says no, you kind of flexible Rabbi. But no, simply I leave it to Shalom. Says Rabbi is the other Mishnah, and Rabbi chose to plug in different Tanaic opinions with different parts of the Mishnah. Rava Amr of Shimoni, the Sovala Kramer Bachada, was called a God. Rava says no, it's Rabbi Shimon, and also Rabbi Shimon holds like Rabbi Meir in one piece. So this was Rabbi Meir in the other. This is the Sanya, Varim Shipping, Kohen Gadol, and Kohen Hedron. So there's one other difference between a Kohen Gadol and a Kohen Hedron. Elu Hain, these are the differences. Our Haba, Kol HaMitzvos. What's the number one? There's a special power that only Kohen Gadol brings. If indeed he transgresses something, Upari Yom Kippur, the power of Yom Kippur, Vasir Sa'ifa, and the special daily meal offering. We'll say now, watch this. Below Korea, below Poland. And we'll say furthermore again, if the Kohen Gadol suffers loss, Korea will say he doesn't let his hair grow long, right? And Korea, he does not go ahead and tear his clothes. How about Korea Mulamata? So we'll say, what kind of Kohen Gadol will discuss this in again. Prepare his clothing from his bottom. We'll discuss what that means in just a moment. But a hedjot means also in this case, a hedjot means what? A regular Kohen prepares his clothing from the top. Name the time of the clothing. And we'll say neither of them. Excuse me, and the Kohen Gadol doesn't have the ability to go and name the time even for his clothing, even for his enemies' daughters. Musar Allah and the Kohen Gadol can only marry a Muslim. The Asr Ma'amana, and he cannot marry. Kohen Gadol can marry an Amana. U'machsir Sarotzeach, and that's the Kohen Gadol ultimately again allows the Roshech to be on the class. U'machsir Onein, Kohen Gadol can go ahead and offer up Karbanos even when he's only. Let's never get Aninus in the period, to see death and burial. They ain't all time. Let's say he can offer up his Karban during the time of Aninus. He can't eat of that Karban during that time. They ain't a holy. He doesn't receive a portion of Karbanos offered during the time of Aninus. Makriv Chilik Barosh, Vinota Chilik Barosh. We'll say if the Kohen Gadol to offer a Karban, he will have to cut the line. Like he can go ahead and offer first. Vinota Chilik Barosh. And we'll say, and again, he is permitted to take his portion of any Karban before any other Karban. And he wears 8 different garments. The Chalavodah, so he wears Ino Kshira Ela Bo. And I will say again, the entire Avodah of Yom Kippur is only kosher with him. Or it's only to be done. I will say first 500 days, 1 day. And I will say ultimately again, if he inadvertently rules regarding, we saw this a couple of days ago, regarding if he erroneously was regarding something to do with the Beis Hamikdash and the laws of Tumah. So ultimately, again, he is potter. He doesn't have a special carbon on that. The Chulan noagim the Meruba Tzedakah. I will say the truth is, all of these items, all of these requirements, which apply to to a Kohen Gadol who is anointed to Shemen HaMishcha, also applied to a Kohen Gadol who is Meruba V'Vegadim, with one exception, Chutz Mipara HaNevi Akala Mitzvos. We'll say for one thing, which is the special power that is brought in situation with the Kohen Gadol permits something that is impartial by Karis. Only a Kohen Gadol who was anointed with oil brings that power. The Kohen Gadol who is Meruba V'Vegadim, who is anointed with putting on the vestments of the Kohen Gadol, does not bring that power. Kula Noagim B'Mashiach Shabar. All of these halachos of the Kohen Gadol also apply to what? To a replacement Kohen Gadol who is now out of a job. Right? The replacement Kohen Gadol, once the original Kohen Gadol comes, that person is called Mashiach Shabar. Chutz Mipayom and Kippur Masirasei. The exception again, the Party Yom Kippur and the meal offering. The Chulan Inut Noagim B'Mashiach Mechama. I will say none of these things apply to the Kohen Gadol who was anointed for the purposes of work goods. With the exception of 5 things which are stated in the Torah, namely, Lo Koreh V'Lo Koreh, he suffers the loss of a close relative. He does not allow his hair to grow. Right? Nor does he care his clothing. Name is time with the clothing. He cannot become coming to his relatives. In Musha Allah B'Suba, he dressed to marry a B'Suba, V'Asr Ba'amana, and he cannot marry an Amana. U'Machzir Shalatzeach, and he has the ability to use death ultimately to what? But other exactly bigger than the Chum say no Machzir. And I will say ultimately again, the Kohen Mashiach Mechama, his death does not allow Yirotzeach to come back from. So also, my focus of using the about whether or not the death of the Mashiach Mechama allows Yirotzeach to come back. Ahai, you might have Shimini. So say, how do you know ultimately this is the person who I'm Papa, Man Shamas Leidar, Pantakos Leidar Shekadashim, who was the one who said before that the point that Merub Begadim is Pater on Tulas Midrash Shadashim, which the Gemara says that's Rabbi. But Chutz Mehei Dvar HaMurim Parsha. So let's remember again, the Christ just said before that the Kohen Mashiach Mechama is considered to be all of the halachos that we discussed by the Kohen was Mashiach B'Shemen HaMishcha do not apply to the Kohen Mashiach Mechama with the exception of 5 things. So those are the 5 things that we just mentioned. Namely, again, he doesn't let his hair grow, he doesn't wear his clothing, he doesn't become coming even to close relatives, he has to marry a B'Sula, and he can't marry an Almana. So we'll say, so says the Gemara.
The details of the Beis HaMikdash, but just generally we're talking about what it looked like. You had the outer area, the area of the Har HaBayis.
Right, the Kohen who was greater than his brother, Zach Kohen Gadol. Was the first Kohen Gadol? Asher Yitzchak al Rosh Hashanah Mishcha, who will put oil on his head. Zeh Mashiach Mechama. So this refers what the Kohen was anointed for. Immediately as he goes to and literally again he fills his hands to go to the Kohen. What's the first special clothing of the Kohen Gadol? Zeh Meruba Gadol. What's this refers ultimately again to the Kohen becomes the Kohen Gadol by putting on the special vestments of the Kohen Gadol. Kulanu Omer, Rosholo Yifra, we'll say that all of these colors, so we'll say whether you are a Kohen Mashiach Mechama, right? Whether you are whether you're a Kohen Gadol, Mashiach Mechama, or Meruba V'Vegadim, the halach is supposed to say that all of them it is said, Rosholo Yifra, do not cut your hair in the event of Alelus, and V'Vegadim Lo Yifra, do not tear your clothes. Call the Pashas Meis Lo Yachol, nor can you come in contact with any clothes. No, you must be only in Havara Tosas, all of them offer up Kabbalas even in the state of Aninos. Hamudlomar, Kinezer Shaman Mishkas Alakem, Arokab Allah. What's it? The Pasuk says literally, the crown of the anointing oil is on his head. So Allah, below Al Kadir. Ultimately, again, upon him and not upon his son. It is only the Kohen Gadol who is anointed with Shaman HaMishcha, who has the ability to go ahead and offer up a carbon while he isn't owned. That is unique to him. That does not apply to any of our other Kohanim Gadol. Even though all of the Kohanim Gadol, remember again, we have a number of people called the Kohen Gadol. There's the Kohen Gadol, who is anointed Shaman HaMishcha, then there's the Kohen Mashiach Mechama, Kohen goes out to war, there's Kohen Meruba V'Vegadim, who's also the Kohen Gadol, but not anointed Shaman HaMishcha. All of these people have Kohen Gadol status. And in general, they all have pretty much the same basic halachos. You are just pointing out the exceptions over here. The halacha l'maisa again for hakravas only and for aninos, for the ability to offer up a carbon while in a state of aninos that only applies to the Kohen. was anointed with oil, not the other Kohanim. I might have thought the Gemara says, maybe again, after you see this distinction by Aninos, maybe also only the Kohen Gadol anointed with Shana Mishcha Shakmaya B'Sulah. Maybe the other ones don't have to. Therefore, also the Pasuk says the Hu and the Hu comes to include all of them in the din of B'Sulah. Kitanai, and was in reality, Yin is Machmoses Tanai, Hu Isha B'Sulah Yika, was the Pasuk says Isha marry only with B'Sulah. After Shekizaka Kosa, Reba, after the Torah goes ahead and makes the chilik between them, the Torah includes all of them. After the Torah makes a distinction between the various types of Quran and Gedolim, the Torah once again groups them all together in the obligation to marry a woman who is a B'Sulah. These those are Mishmar. Kiva Omer Imi Elisha Avar Machmas Karyom Machmas Mumi Minayim. So the Kiva says, I only know. We'll say look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says over here. Rashi says, Avar Machmas Mumi Minayim. Kalamar Baru. Dafilu Avar Rishon Machmas Mumo Asar Ba'amana. So I only know. Let me read the first part of this. So Gemara says over here as follows. I only know. Rabbi Kiva says, Imi Elisha Machmas Karyom. That even if a Kohen Gadol cannot work as a Kohen Gadol because let's say he had a seminal and temple mission. Even during that time when he can't go ahead and work as a Kohen Gadol, I still know there's a prohibition from to marry an Amana. How do I know Machmas Mumin Minayim? How do I know that even if the Kohen, let's say, has some type of significant mum, which renders him unfit long-term? We're going to discuss this more in depth in just a moment. How do I know that he still can't marry an Amana? Everyone said the pasuk says which tells us that even once he's in the state of a Kohen Gadol, he cannot marry an Amana, he can only marry a B'Sulah. We'll say this is the follow to the next question. Mashiach shenitztara mahu ba'amana. Let's listen to this kasha. What happens if the Kohen Mashiach, the anointed Kohen, he got saras? So obviously he gets saras, he cannot function as the Kohen Gadol. Obviously, because he can't go into the something to saras. So say what's the shayla? Mahu ba'amana. Can he marry an Amana? Can he marry an Amana now that he can't serve as a Kohen Gadol because of his saras? Can he marry an Amana? I will say that this might be a short-term marriage because once he's healed, he can't be married. But the period that he has saras, he's permitted to be married to an Amana. So the Gemara says, do we say that no? Once you were the Kohen Gadol, so then what? Remember again, we saw it before that once you're Kohen Gadol, that's status is. Where do we see that? Remember again that even after he's no longer operating Kohen Gadol, if he accidentally transgresses, he still brings the power, the right to cover of the Kohen Gadol. So do we say Mishchadafi? Once Kohen Gadol, always Kohen Gadol, and therefore again, even if he can't actively serve, he cannot marry an Amana. I will say maybe again no, that the prohibition to marry an Amana is a function of being the active Kohen Gadol. Once you are set aside from being a Kohen Gadol because of your taras, you can marry an Amana. They'll have a day. Let's remember again, Rabbi asked this Shaila of Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman didn't know. So what happens? In the Hamiyasir, Rav Papa to come up from Kanibayile. So when Rav Papa was sitting and he was asking this question, Amralei, who not raised Rav Nachman, Rav Papa. So this is what happens. So Rav Papa was asking this question. So what happens? So who not the son of Rav Nachman said to Rav Papa, Tanino, we learned it in the Mishnah. Amy Elishavar Machmas Karyot. I only know ultimately a Kohen who was the obligation to marry a B'Sulah, or actually prohibition to marry a Amana. I only know that even if a Kohen is disqualified because of the seminal mission, the prohibition of only marrying a B'Sulah still applies. Avar Machmas Mumin Minayin. I know Rabbi said even if a Kohen is disqualified from service because of his mum, that Rabbi said the prohibition upon marrying certain women still applies. Rabbi said the word Bahu means what? Bahu Isha means that he is always in his stance of a Kohen Gadol. Even if he can't actively serve in that office, he is the Kohen Gadol, and therefore even if he has a mum and can't actively serve, he can only marry a B'Sulah. Look how beautiful this is. So Papa asked the kasha. Papa didn't know either. Una answered the question. This is so beautiful. So come Nashke Breshe, that Papa got up and kissed Una on his head, the Yohev laid Barte, and gave him his daughter in marriage. Let's say so. Such a beautiful Gemara. I'm sure, of course, he called the references on the resume, but after he did that, he went ahead and gave him a kiss, and he gave him his daughter. So let's do another Mishnah. Kohen Gadol, we'll say, so remember again, we need references to this one. That's very fascinating. Kohen Gadol pouring in the mato, v'hedot in the mato. Most of the please, that a Kohen Gadol goes ahead
And pouring in the matter, which means what? Tears his clothing in the event that Chas Shalom is a loss, because Kriya on the bottom of his clothing, the Hegyot in the mouth. But a regular Kohen could do Kriya on the top. Kohen Gadol Makribonim, a Kohen Gadol could go ahead and offer up a carbon even in a state of animals, below Ochel, but he cannot eat it. He could offer it, but he can't eat it. So say regular Kohen can't offer it and can't eat it. Can't offer it and can't eat it. Gemara. Amarav, lemata lemata manish, lemala lemala manish. So what does it mean when the Kohen Gadol does Kriya on the bottom and the Kohen Hegel does Kriya on the top? So we'll say Rav says that's literally again it means the bottom of the garment and the top of the garment. So we'll say bottom of the garment would be like by the hem, right? And top of the garment would be ultimately again by the neck, by the neck. So the Gemara says Shmuel says no. Lemata becoming Saba. Lemata means we'll say below the neckline. We'll say kind of like a t-shirt. So the neckline, I don't know what the right technical term is. Like I'm sorry, like not a shirt, like on a t-shirt, like the neckline is like reinforced, right? So we'll say so. The Gemara says Shmuel says Lemata means below the reinforced neckline. What is it? The piping of the shirt. Sounds like a piping. So the piping, so part of the piping. So right below the neckline. So the Kohen Gadol, let's go work backwards. The Kohen Hegel will say when he cuts Kriya for a loved one, he cuts Kriya at the neckline. They cut the top of the garment. That's Lamala. Lamata means the Kohen Gadol cuts not at the neckline, but rather in the garment itself. What's the top of that? Because when you cut in the garment itself, then what happens? The tear might not necessarily be visible. So I say, so Machlokes ultimately Lamala Mikamei Safa. So we'll say Machlokes Rav and Shmuel. Ultimately, again, where we are actually cutting. Are we cutting ultimately? What does Lamala Lamata mean? Rav says Lamata means literally at the bottom of the garment. That's where the Kohen Gadol is cutting. Lamala means the top of the garment. That's where the Kohen Hegel is cutting. Shmuel says no. Lamala means at the neckline. That's where the Kohen Gadol. That's where the Kohen Hegel is cutting. And Lamata means what? Lamata means below the neckline. That's where the Kohen Gadol is cutting. Mace Akola Mason Shmuel Rasa Madlo coming Safa Shalom. Madlo coming Safa Shalom. So I'll say, actually, we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up in Eretz Hashem with this Mace Day tomorrow.
And so everywhere we look, we see tzimtzum, we see this contraction of God's presence. There was one spot in the universe where there was no.
All right, so we'll say good morning. Let's begin. Our shir this morning is dedicated by Paul Jack. In memory of Solid Sarah Basavar Mishwal Betcharia and their Shabbos Hadraliyah and the families in the couple. Also, as you know, today is Yom HaShoah, day in which one of the days, even though it's an interesting thing, because even though we know that Tisha B'Av is the day that we commemorate all tragedies of Klal Yisrael, but nevertheless, this is a day that was designated to also commemorate this Korban. So therefore, again, whatever one's religious feelings are is somewhat irrelevant. At the end of the day, any day that's set aside to remember such an incredible, overwhelming Korban of Klal Yisrael, 6 million Kedoshim, requires us to be attentive. So we dedicate our learning this morning. The Hebrew Nishmas, the 6 million Kedoshim, and the hope that the Neshamas will have an Aliyah, Rish and Ner Hashem, all each of them individually be a million Kedoshim. I suppose let's begin. Your days on the Aleph. First word, so the Gemara asks, was there really Shana Mishka? Remember, again, pick up a little bit. The Gemara beforehand was discussing the idea that King Yehoahaz was, or actually Yehoiakim, was anointed with Shana Mishka. So the Gemara asks, was there Shana Mishka in the times of Yehoiakim? After all, the Gemara says, and the Nignas Aron, Nignas Shana Mishka, when the Aron was hidden away. Shana Mishka was also hidden away. This in sense will say this is actually a fascinating right. So speaking about all of the things that were hidden away in anticipation of the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. So when the Aron was hidden, the Shana Mishka was hidden. It's in Senas Hamar. Was the jar of mud that was kept in the Aron. Umaklo shel Aaron, the staff of Aaron, shkiyel gahel, with its almonds and its flowers. The argos sheshal kushtim darn Yisrael, and including in that, of course, was the argos, which is the box in which the Pishtim sent to gift
Klal Yisrael. What is this referring to? Shne'emar ve'es klei hazav asher shivosam la'Hashem hasimu ba'argaz v'shidov v'shilachtem al savahala. So this is referring to when the sons of Eli, Chafni and Pinchas, took the Aron out to war with Klal Yisrael and were defeated by the Christians. Not only defeated Klal Yisrael, but they also went ahead and took the Aron captive. This is the famous Ma'aseh Navi, where wherever they took the Aron, there was an incredible outbreak of diarrhea and hemorrhoids to the point that the Christians said, thanks but no thanks. They sent back the Aron, and together with the Aron, they sent back a gift of gold. That gold was kept together with the Aron. So the Gemara is saying that when they hid away the Aron, they hid away that gold as well. And who hid the Aron? Yoshio Melech Yehuda does. Yoshio, the king of Yehuda, went ahead and hid it away. Why? Because this is how the pasuk that said, Yolech Hashem Oscha Ves Malkecha. Yoshio saw the writing on the wall that there was going to be a promise. And he saw the writing on the wall that the Mikdash was going to be destroyed. And as such, he did not want these items falling into Gentile hands, and therefore, again, he went ahead and he did them. Therefore, Tziva Baganzu Shne'emar, Hayomer Levin HaMevinim L'chol Yisrael, HaKadoshim LaHashem, Tnuas Ara Kodesh B'Bayis Shabbat Shlomo Ben David, Melech Yisrael. So apparently, Shlomo HaMelech built subterranean chambers in the first place HaMikdash. Whether he built them in anticipation of its destruction or they built them for some other reason, the point is there are subterranean chambers in the Beis Hamikdash. So Yoshio gives the command to remove, hide the Aron as well as all these other things in some of the subterranean. Which also is an amazing thing because what it tells us is, and it's from this Gemara, that the Aron HaBris is in Harabayis, somewhere there, somewhere buried in Harabayis itself, waiting ultimately, again, I guess, for Mashiach to come to reveal his location. So the Gemara, Eimach and Masa, because they so Yoshio tells the Levine, you no longer have any avoda b'kasei. Avoda b'kasei means what? You don't have to carry anything. There's no longer anything for you to carry. But what is your job? So if you as Hashem Elokeichem ve'as amo Yisrael. What's your job? To be an Eved Hashem and to be an Eved Klal Yisrael. Just because you don't have your responsibility, that's what we saw 2 days ago. Right, about the idea that any form of leadership is really a form of obvious. You don't carry the Aron anymore now. It's fine. You never talk historically, you never talk. Amar Belazar. Asya, the Gemara makes Xer Shabbat from Asya Sham Sham. Asya Mishmeres. Asya Doros. Because ultimately we're going to make Xer Shabbat between all of these items listed above to teach us that just as the Aron was hidden, so too all of these items were hidden as well. So it says, therefore, again, we come back to our original question. How could you tell me that Yoachaz was anointed with Shemana Mishcha because of his older brother Yehoiakim, when at the end of the day there is no more Shemana Mishcha by this point in time, to which the Gemara answers, Amra Papa, Ba'afar Smadah. Right, it's like, there is no Shemana Mishcha, but instead he was anointed ultimately again with balsam oil. Balsam oil. Okay, so the Shemana Mishcha, also remember again, we mentioned that she also was anointed with balsam oil, Shemana Bar Shaul. Why? Because Shaul was out of the king. Malchus was always going to come from Yehuda. Shaul was from Ephraim. So Shemana Parsel, I will say, represents the anointing, but will probably be more temporal anointing. So the mother is like, these Gemaras are amazing. How do I head and anoint the king? How do you anoint the king? So commit Nazer. So the Gemara says you go and you make a Nazer means like a crown. Like a crown. Ve'esa Kohanim kimin ki. And the Kohanim ultimately again like a key. My community. So once I saw again, the king, you take Shemana Mishcha, you smear it around his head like a crown. How do you go ahead and anoint the Kohanim? Kimin ki. My community, like a Greek cuff. Now, if you look at Rashi has over here, Rashi has it looking like the letter Ches. So the way that it looks, by the way, according to Rashi is, to give you a visual here, you start between the eyes, and essentially you smear the Shemana Mishcha down the head, all the way down to the neck. So it's like a ches. It's like a ches. Others here it looks a little bit more like a cuff. So but you get the point over here is you're starting at the front of the head, and you're smearing the oil all the way to the back of the head. Tani Chada, the Tchila Motzim Shemen HaRosho, the Achakach Nosin Lo Shemen Ben Nishtei. So we'll say, see, we're going to see now we have two conflicting accounts. According to one account, we go ahead and we pour the shemen on his head first, and then afterwards we put it between his eyes. The Tanya Krisi, Tchila Nosin Lo Shemen Ben Nishtei. Different prices says no. First we put the shemen between his eyes, and then we go ahead and we pour it on his head. Tonight, also it's my focus on the proper order. We know that anointing requires both pouring as well as putting oil between the eyes. This is my focus apparently again, which is the proper order. So some say, will say that the anointing between the eyes is the most important part. And others say no, it is the pouring of the oil on the head that is the most important part. My time in Jaman the Amar Yitzika Adifa. We'll say what is the reason for the opinion that says that the pouring is the most important part. Siv, Vayitzok Mishemet HaMishcha Al Rosh Alo, Vayimshach O Solakadsho. We'll say because again the pasuk itself says what? Vayitzok first. The pasuk itself says you pour the oil before you anoint the oil or you dab the oil, you smear the oil. See that is more important. The opinion says that no, the smearing is more important. He says, remembering on both sides, that Yitzika pouring the oil is something you not only find by the Kohen, but you also find by what? By the king. The fact that the utensils are also anointed with pouring tells us that pouring is the dominant form of inauguration. We must by Yitzok here's the problem. The order in the pasuk is first by Yitzok pour, and then by Yimshach anoint. Hachikamar, what's what the Lord means to say? Matan by Yitzok. Why is it that ultimately again or Yishum by Yimshach? Because the anointing has already been done. Suppose I fundamental my focus on as to ultimately again how the proper anointing was done. Two parts to the anointing. One is the pouring of the oil over the head, one is the smearing between the eyes. Which one was done first? So I suggest you should know the Brisa passage, the Rambam passage, that first mold skin and then no skin. The Rambam passage that really was anointed by God was first to go ahead and pour the oil and then to go ahead and smear it between his eyes. Okay? The words is fine. These Gemaras are amazing. Shemen HaTov, Yorei ala Zakan, kind of Adam. Like good oil that flows down the beard. It flows down the beard. It flows down the beard of the older Aaron HaKol. So it's the pasuk over here. The pasuk over here is holy. Let me read the pasuk again. It's tired. So the pasuk over here is from Tel. Kashaman Atol Arosh Al Harosh Yori Al Zakan Arosh Yori Al Tzos. So what Shemen HaTov is flowing down the beard of Aaron HaKol. So the Gemara says it's a reference ultimately again to the Shemen HaMishcha. Remember again, Aaron is anointed by Moshe with anointing the Shemen HaMishcha. Also listen to this beautiful Gemara. Kimin shtein tivos margolios hayutuyos la'Aaron b'shikah. There were two droplets of Shemen HaMishcha that were constantly hanging on the edge of Aaron's beard. Amar Papa. Let's say when the Aaron would talk, so the droplets would like roll up the beard of the Why? That they wouldn't fall off as he was talking. So two droplets of Shemen HaMishcha that sit on the edge of his beard, and when he would talk, they would roll up. But Al Davar said, how your motion like when discussing symbolism. The Al Davar said how your motion like, and regarding these two droplets, first shading was always good. Always he was down. Was a second wide line you facing down. Amar, maybe I committed an act of evil. What is it? So I applied too much Shemen HaMishcha, and therefore again it has to be an act of Megillah. Remember again, what's Megillah? Megillah is illegal or money being used unconsecrated property. So the Gemara says, Yotza Zabasko va'amra Shemen HaTov. So ultimately again, the Basko comes out and says, Shemen HaTov, like the good oil, Kal Chermon. And again, this is so beautiful. The Gemara, the pasuk compares. The pasuk this is the very next pasuk. This is all in Chapot of Koflan and Gimel, 133. It says, "Kal Chermon Shorei B'Hari Tzion," like the dew of the Chermon, which falls down in Hari Tzion. So what's the comparison between oil and Kal Chermon and the dew? Matal Chamor Inbom Gila, Hachshan Mishra Shabazaka Ara Inbom Gila. Just like the most like there is no Megillah with you, so too again, Shemana Mishra, in the period of Aaron, there is no Megillah as well. Va'adayin haya Aaron doing. It's still Aaron was concerned. Amar Shema Moshe Loma Ala Ima. Aaron says maybe Moshe will be looking at Megillah, but maybe I did. Or maybe I got some enough from the
Well,
field that was
are you seeing this athleticism? Look at this move. Like, this motherfucker's still blabbing about this fucking house. You were talking for so long, my man.
Just like
Calm
Moshe,
down. Get me back.
Aaron, don't
Your
worry, you
pants
didn't
off.
commit Miracle. I'll say again very quickly. What's this?
Dog, listen to this athleticism.
Shona Mishcha is
It's
always
rich.
sitting in the beard of Aaron. Let's say when is Shona Mishcha
Dog.
put on a
Look at this
someone
move.
when they're inaugurating.
Look at this move. Give me an update.
Represents newness. Shona Mishcha
People
represents
demand an update.
Shona Mishcha represents
I
uses for something.
can tolerate.
Chazal were telling us was that the Shona Mishcha always
I
remained
love-
on the beard of Aaron.
This is my
It
favorite.
was as moist, it was as wet as the day it was applied. I tell you that Aaron's excitement for the community,
Somebody shit on
Aaron's
this
excitement
motherfucker.
for Zavodas Hashem was as fresh every single day as the first day he came. And ultimately, again, incredible medical hospitals. And you know, that's the greatest challenge. The greatest challenge our Yitzchak was like is not the execution of God's commandments. Generally speaking, we can handle that. We can handle Shmiras HaMitzvot.
What in the fuck is
Our
this?
greatest challenge is feeling a newness, it's feeling an excitement, it's feeling like it's something special that we have the opportunity to do. Regardless of Aaron Cohen, was not simply that he complied with the divine mandate. That's obvious. Every Jew has to comply with the divine mandate. The godless of Aaron Cohen is that he felt an excitement like the day in which the Shemana Mishcha was first applied to him. So the Gemara goes back to Rabbanon. We'll say beautiful Gemara. In Moshe Masamalachim ala Mayon. Let's say so. We only anoint kings. We anoint kings. This literally we only anoint kings by a Maya, by a spring. By a spring. We'll say because anointing a king by a spring was like a symbolically good omen. The idea being that just like the spring flows, so too again the king's monarchy should continue to flow as well. Shene Emar, Nayoma HaMelech was that side, just as a total aside. If you go into the Torah of Pir David, and you take the water tunnel, the Gihon, that's the Gihon spring. Was like that is where Klal Yisrael historically anointed Malach by the Gihon. It's an incredible thing to see. You stand in that and everything. It's fun because you're walking through water. But more fun than walking through water was to stand on the spot where literally again Malchit base David were anointed. That's the spot. So the Gemara goes back to the Gemara says Shneimar. The Gemara Melech Lehem Kichui Mochem Es Abdi Adonechem Barak Nosa Lagichos. Oh, good. Hanav Yami. Hi, man. Most of this. Most of this. I have to tell you. Originally, I wasn't going to be okay, and then when I saw this Daf Gemara, I said, I can't miss this. I can't miss this. So also listen to this. I'm Rabbi Ami. Hi, man. The boy leader. He must have shas yilo. Also listen to this. If a person wanted to know they're going to live out the year or not. Now again, please don't leave early from this before we finish this piece over here, right? I don't want anyone walking away with this. Listen to this. First of all, if you're going to live out the year or not. So what should you do? Take a candle during a Sarasimi Chula. Put it in a house, where there is not a strong wind. If the candle remains lit, it's enough. Right? If the candle remains lit, then what? Neda the Masik Shastra. What's that? If the candle remains lit, then a person knows that they're going to live out the year. So once you hear this, take a candle during a Sarasimi Chula, place it in a home where there is not a strong wind. If the candle remains lit, you're going to live out the year. Similarly, what's that? Number one. Number two, first of all, I'm going to be successful in business. I have a particular business venture that I want to undertake. Am I going to be successful or not? And I want to know if I'm going to be successful or not successful. Literally, buy yourself a rooster. If the rooster gets fat, then I will say that's a sign you're going to be successful. Number three, I'm going on a trip, and I want to know if I'm going to come back. I want to know if I'm going to make it back or not. So what should I do? So what happens? So we'll say ultimately again go to a home that is darkened, not that is pitch dark, but that is darkened. If you see the shadow of your shadow, then you know ultimately again that you're gonna come home okay. So we'll say, so just I want to point something out over here. What is going on in this Gemara? Right? What is this talking about? So first of all, so we'll say, so the Marshal, again, I'm going to owe you this thing. You write this down. I owe you this Marshal. We have to do this inside. Maybe Shabbos, because Shabbos' daf is a tiny little daf of it's just a little piece. So I'll say, so the Marshal says over here, he says, I don't understand. There's a biblical prohibition of Los Nachashim. You're not allowed to engage in forms of divination. So we don't do omens. We don't do omens. So the Marshal says something absolutely amazing. The Marshal says, well, so if you look at the Gemara does something dramatic. If a person wants to know if they're going to live out the year or not, so what does the Gemara say? What does the Gemara say? Take a candle, put it in a home where there's not a lot of wind. And what does the Gemara say? If it stays lit, then you're going to live. We'll say, what doesn't the Gemara say? If it goes out, you're going to die. We'll say, if you notice again on each of the things mentioned in the Gemara, the only thing that's mentioned is the positive. The Marshal says something amazing. The default setting of life is that things are going to work out. A person has to have an expectation that things in life are going to work out, that I'm going to live, that I'm going to be successful, that I'm going to make it back home. So if I do the omen, and the omen confirms the positive outcome, then what? Well, say that's not an omen. What is that? What is that? That's life. That is an affirmation that things are good, which is the natural default mindset of the Jew. If the candle goes out, what does it mean? What does it mean? Nothing. It means nothing. It means don't pay attention to it because, again, that's an omen then. So it's like an amazing result. When the Gemara talks about these omens are here ultimately, again, to affirm a positive outlook on life, which is supposed to be the default outlook of the Jew. So if these omens confirm the positive outcome, fantastic. You think it says something negative, simply ignore it. Don't say, so you understand, I'm not doing the Marshal justice, it's a much longer piece. Don't say you understand the godless in this idea that is teaching us how to look at life. You know, there are some people that are always waiting for the other shoe to drop. There are some people who are just waiting for the sky to fall. And sometimes for good reason, sometimes because they had a lot of life trauma and a lot of life difficulties. And sometimes when you've been through a lot, you just expect bad stuff to happen. It's understandable, but that's not what Kodesh Baruch Hu wants of us. Kodesh Baruch Hu wants to have a positive expectation for life, that things are good, that things will work out, that life is beautiful. That has to be the natural default. I will say, so you say to yourself, okay, it's easy to have that mindset if everything works out. But again, herein lies the true test of our spiritual mettle. I'm supposed to have that outlook even if things don't work out. It didn't work out this time. It'll work out next time. It didn't work out for the last 25 years. It's okay. Baruch Hashem, the next 25 are going to be great. I'll say that's the power of the Jew. To have an unconquerable optimism. To have an unconquerable positive outlook on life. That's what these signs do. But let's look how the Gemara ends off. The Gemara says, Valav Milsi. But my suggestion, the Gemara says, is don't pay attention to omens. Why? The Gemara says, because most you know what the problem is? The problem is as beautiful as that Marshal is. If you're that guy who lights the candle, and then what? It goes out, and suddenly it's not going to be so easy to shake that one off. So it says, therefore the Gemara says, you know what? You're better off just staying away from omens. Not omens, you're staying from these type of symbols in general. But we'll say, yet the Gemara says something just to pull out. It's very exciting. Rabbi, hashtag the Amr Simla Milsi. We'll say, do you see this? This is the Gemara. So Rabbi says, now that you told me that omens are significant, not typically omens, but like signs are significant. Get ready for this. We'll say, this halacha myself. Le'olam yeheragil le'mechse l'reish shasa. What's it there for a person? You should always look at that. If you notice again, so the girsa over here is lemechse. So the Hagos assume changes it to lemechol. Was it in fact again? This Gemara appears here in Maseches Haryas and Hagos, and we'll say two different results. One is lemechse, one is lemechol. We'll discuss in just a moment. So Rabbi says, now that we said that what that omens are significant, a person on Rosh Hashanah should look at or should eat kra, rubia, parsley, silky, tamar. Person should eat a gourd and a fenugreek and leeks and beets and dates. So outside, you understand? We do this. This is Simanilsa. We do this at Rosh Hashanah, right? You sit down and they go through a whole bunch of food. on Rosh Hashanah. Where did that practice come from? That is a derivative. That's the schema. Also, if you look at Rashi in just a moment, Rashi says over here. Rashi says if you look
And they
at
didn't even like it.
About finds into short lines. Does your practice still determine why these food items? Now, the honey got to the adults today.
They didn't like it.
Well, see, Rashi said the common denominator amongst these things is that they grow fast. They represent vitality. So we choose about this is different because the Torah brings down something different. The Torah explains that the reason we eat these items is because their names, which also we see the Yiratzon. The Yiratzon somehow are a play on these names. Rashi says no, the common denominator amongst these items is they grow quickly and therefore they represent vitality. Because of that, ultimately, again, we begin Rosh Hashanah with those items.
What the fuck is this?
The Matan actually brings down
Hey, she's standing.
He says, why does one Gemara say Renechel? What's that? Is an incredible nafkamina. Let's say I don't like any of the symbolic foods. I don't like dates, beets, leeks, fenugreek, fish heads, lamb's heads. Just not my thing. Right? I don't. So I'll say, so what? Which for many people that's the case. And so I'll say, so what happens? I don't like any of these. What do you do?
Woman, this is the worst content I've ever seen in my entire life.
Each of them on your table, and to look at them and to recite the Yiratzon based on the skills of the Gemara. Everyone thinks it's just lamechal, just to eat.
Content.
It's not true. Even if you're not going to eat it, there's an Indian ultimately to have it. But say to look at it. Incredible.
But this is worse.
What's this? Ramshashi said to his son, when you want to come and from your rebellion, listen to this. Prepare. Learn the Mishnayos before you go to your Rebbe. What's in other words, if you want to really learn, it's incredible you saw.
Somebody shit on this.
You can't just show up to learn. A person has to prepare themselves. So he says, review your Mishnayos, and then go before your Rebbe. And when you sit before your Rebbe, let's listen to this. Look at your Rebbe's mouth. Look at your Rebbe's mouth. It's such an interesting application. We know that pasuk to mean that ultimately, again, we should be looking at our Rebbeim. He's saying over here, Dafka, look at their lips as the words are coming out. When you learn by a river. It sounds nice. Learn by a river. Was in the same way that ultimately, again, the water flows, so your learning should flow as well. The tivu, how listen to this profound statement. And better to learn on the garbage heaps, or better to sit actually, to live in the garbage heaps of Masa Machasya and don't live in the palaces of Pompadisa. Let's look at Rashi for just a moment. The Masa Machasya, Havotamidim Chacham Royum Laras Tarbus Yafa, Hayabahan, Aval Visa Lo Hava Tarbus Mal Yukota, the Kamalay Mutav Lo Lodr Bashpa, Masa Machasya, Yulodr Abandon Visa. Better to live in a garbage dump in Pompadisa than in a mansion, in Masa Machasya, than a mansion in Pompadisa. So what does that mean? And apparently Masa Machasya was an incredible Makom Torah. Pompadisa not as much, which is interesting because you have to think Pompadisa was one of the major Torah cities. I guess at different points in history was different, quality was different. Better to live in a garbage heap in a Makom Torah than to live in a mansion in a place that is not a Makom Torah. Furthermore, again, better to eat a galgana was a type of fish. Better to eat type of fish, ultimately of this galgana fish that's about to spoil, than to eat the kusach of Rabbi. The kusach was a higher end gift. So better to eat a fish that's almost going bad than to eat the fine dip of the kusach. So what that means what? Be careful how many pleasures in life you attach yourself to. Because I always say the more pleasures a person needs, the higher the material upkeep is.
Genuine.
The more difficult it is to focus on spirituality. So what he's telling his son is better to get by on the putrid fish than to have to require the kusach. Because once you require the kusach, again, it's going to need a lot more materialism ultimately again to make that. So he's giving his son all of these incredible lessons. Live in a Makom Torah, even if it means living in a garbage dump, better than going ahead and living in a mansion somewhere that's not a Makom Torah. Be careful how much materialism you build into your life. Because whatever materialism you build into your life, so we all know this, what begins as a luxury very quickly becomes a necessity. And once it becomes a necessity, you move on to the next luxury. That becomes a necessity until these things become indispensable parts of my life, which then unfortunately leads me sometimes to place an overemphasis on my materialism and less of an emphasis on my spirituality. Beautiful. Rama Karni Belokai. So I say the Pasuk says, David Amal says, literally, my horn was lifted to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rama Karni below Rama Pach. Literally, but I will say now, we assume that this horn is a reference to the horn in which the Shemana Mishka was contained. My horn and not my jug. David Shalom were anointed with the oil inside of the keren, inside of a horn. So their monarchy endured. Shol b'yeru shnum shchu b'pach, lo nim shkom apusan. But Shol and Yeruvasim who were anointed with oil from a pach, from an earthenware jug, their monarchy did not endure. What's like conscious what that means is as follows. Rashi points out that a pach is earthenware. Earthenware easily cracks, as opposed to a horn, right? A keren endures. So as I said, because of that, those who are anointed from the horn, their monarchy endures. Those anointed from the pach, their monarchy does not. So once we're going to go back a little bit to Gemara. So remember again, the Mishnah made a distinction between the Kohen Gadol who was anointed with Shemana Mishcha versus the Kohen Gadol who was Merubah of the Gadol. Says the Gemara, Yachol Melech. So also when it says Mashiach, that maybe Mashiach doesn't refer to the morning. Maybe Mashiach doesn't refer to the Kohen Gadol, maybe it refers to the Melech. If it says Kohen, I'm going to put that even refers to the Kohen who is anointed with the Kohanic vestments. Therefore, the pasuk says Mashiach. If it just says Mashiach, I'm going to put that even the king of Osai, who is appointed ultimately again to go to war. By the way, this pasuk is talking about the special power of the Kohen Gadol. I'm going to put that even the Kohen goes out to war. And we'll over the HaKohen. Therefore, also the pasuk comes down and uses the distinct lashon of the HaKohen. HaMashiach, Shir Mashiach al Gavav, who is anointed, which means there is no one anointed above. So the Gemara says, "My mashma, the Gamarava, Hayarech Hamiyimena Shaliyah." Also, the same way the pasuk talks about Hayarech, it means again the specific part. Yeah, this is not the Islam Gilad Nasha. Haganami HaMashiach. When it says HaMashiach, Hamiduman Shil means the one who is designated amongst all those who are anointed. Because remember again, as we saw before, the Kohen Mashiach Melchama was also anointed. Kohen Gadol ultimately was the unique one amongst those who are anointed. Mashiach, Yachol Melech. So what's this? Gemara said before that if I'm on the phone, the pasuk says Mashiach, maybe that's the first to the king. Melech, are we going to see? Does the king, the king does something which is usher? Does he bring a par? Sir, who do I see? He brings a sir. So before Shabbos, which Gemara says, yeah, baby. I'm going to do as follows. For an accidental act, maybe he brings a sir. Al helam davar yavirpan. We'll say in the case of helam davar, maybe he should have to bring a par. Kamash Lama. We'll say Kamash redemption that the pasuk of Hamashiach ultimately again refers to the Kohen Gadol. By in Bein Mashiach B'Shemana Mishcha. So the Mishnah then discusses ultimately the distinctions between the Mashiach B'Shemana Mishcha, the Kohen Gadol who is anointed with oil, versus the Kohen Gadol who is Merubah Bebegadim. Masnisim Delok Rabbi Meir. We'll say our Mishnah does not reflect the view of Rabbi Meir. The Rabbi Meir, because it was Rabbi Meir, hot time like he said, Merubah Bebegadim may be par Haba Al Kolam Mitzvah Meir. So Rabbi Meir says that even Merubah Bebegadim, I will say, even the Kohen Gadol who is not appointed to Shana Mishcha, but rather is appointed because of the Kohanic vestments. So he brings a par Al Kolam Mitzvah. We'll say he brings a special par of the Kohen Gadol, Rabbi Meir. But the whole the Chacham didn't agree with him. The Chacham said that the only Kohen who brings the special power of the Kohen Gadol is the Kohen Gadol who is anointed with Shana Mishcha, not Merubah Bebegadim. My time Rabbi Meir, what's Rabbi Meir's logic? This Sanya, Mashiach Ini Ela Mashiach with Shana Mishcha. I only know that it refers to a Kohen who is anointed with Shana Mishcha. Merubah Bebegadim Minayin. How do I know that it even refers to a Kohen who is anointed with clothing? Talmud Lomar HaKohen HaMashiach. Ultimately, again, the pasuk says HaKohen HaMashiach. So who are we establishing this? Like Rabban on the days. Ema Sefer. I'll say, yeah, look at the end of that price. So, Ein Ben Kohen Mishamish Mishabar. Ela Par Yom Kippurim V'Asira Saif. Asira Saifa. I'll say, yeah, what at the end of the price say? The end of the Mishnah said, that there is no distinction between the Kohen Mishamish. So, what's the Kohen Mishamish means? The active Kohen Gadol who was serving, the Kohen Shavar. What's the Kohen Shavar? That was the villain Kohen Gadol. He was the Kohen Gadol again who filled in when there was something going on with the first Kohen Gadol. So there is no distinction between the two except Par Yom Kippurim, the special Par Yom Kippur, and that serious Sefer, which was the meal offering given by the Kohen Gadol every day. So the Gemara says, who does that reflect? The son of Rabbi Meir. That ultimately again reflects the view of Rabbi Meir. The Sanya, because that's what we learned. Irabo Psul, the Kohen Gadol, Va'avar. So let's listen to this. If something happened to the Kohen Gadol, there was some type of Psul, and they had to remove him from office. Umino Kohen Acher Tachtav, and they appointed a replacement Kohen Gadol. Harishul Chozer La'avodos. So this is actually amazing. What happens when Kohen Gadol number one comes back to work? What happens when he comes back to work? So what happens? So the first one has the ability to come back to work. He's now the practicing Kohen Gadol. The Hasheni Kol Mitzvos Hakuna Alot. So the Sheni is still, of course, a full-fledged Kohen. So we'll say ultimately, again, these are Rabbi Meir. So we'll say Rabbi Meir ultimately holds that the first one is still a full-fledged Kohen. So we'll say what that means is that he just goes back. Obviously, he's not a Kohen Gadol because the nice you can't have two Kohanim Gedolim, but he's just a regular Kohen. Rabbi Yossi Omer Rishon Chos Lavadoso. Rabbi Yossi says when the first Kohen Gadol is fit for service, he comes back to work. The Sheni in a roy lo the Kohen Gadol lo the Kohen Hedge. Wow. And what happens? The second guy will say nothing. He's not the Kohen Gadol, and he can't be a regular Kohen either. We'll discuss that in just a moment. Amr Rabbi Yossi, Ma'aseh Yosef ben Elim. Mitzipor, Rabbi said this happened. There was once an episode of Yosef ben Elim, who was the Kohen Gadol. She'ira bo psul the Kohen Gadol, va'avar umino acher takta. So this is what happens. So there was this episode. There was this episode of the Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol got upset. And what happens was they appointed another person. And then when the first Kohen Gadol came back to work, what happens? When the replacing Kohen Gadol, the replacement was now out of the job. He couldn't be a Kohen Gadol and he couldn't be a Kohen Hedger. Why not? Kohen Gadol is Shuleva. In general, we're going to Kohen Gadol because you're Edamasi. You can't have two Kohanim Gedolim. It doesn't work, right? It doesn't work. There can't be two kings. There can't be two Kohanim Gedolim. At the end, it has to be one leader. So, furthermore, Kohen Hedjot, Mishum Ma'alim Ba'Kodesh Te'im Molim. So, we'll say, you can't go back to being a Kohen Hedjot either. Why not? Because we'll say, once you've been a Kohen Gadol, you can't go back to being a Kohen Hedjot. It doesn't make sense. Ma'alim Ba'Kodesh Te'im Molim. We'll say, says, I don't say, based on this, they should have one of the Sefer here. You can tell me that they should reflect the view of the Rabbanon. The Sefer that you are there. Rabbi Yosef, I'm already, Sefer here, or Rabbi Chistein. He said, yes, they should have one of the Sefer here. Yes, that is going to be the right stuff. Yosef, I'm a Rabbi. And Yosef says, no, the entire reflects the view of that. You could not see where I leave it tonight. Also, Rabbi is the other of the Mishnah, and Rabbi chose to plug in different Tanaic opinions in different parts of the Mishnah. Rava Amr Shimon, the Savla Kaimer, the Chaga, the Kala Garba. Rava said, go to Rabbi Shimon, and also Rabbi Shimon holds like Rabbi Meir in one piece, and this is Rabbi Meir in the other. Where do we see this? The Sanya, Dvarim Shabin, Kohen Gadol, Kohen Hedjot. We'll say, what are the differences between a Kohen Gadol and a Kohen Hedjot? Eluhem, these are the differences. Our Haba, Kol HaMitzvos. What's the number one? Is a special power that only a Kohen Gadol brings if indeed he transgresses something. Upar Yom Kippurim, the Par Yom Kippur, Vasir Sa'ifa, and the special daily meal offering. We'll say, now watch this, below Porea, below Pore. And we'll say, furthermore again, if a Kohen Gadol suffers a loss, low Porea will say he doesn't let his hair grow long, right? And Pore, he does not go ahead and tear his clothing. About the Pore Milamata. So we'll say, also, but what can the Kohen Gadol do? We'll discuss it in that. Prepare his clothing from the bottom. And we'll discuss what that means in just a moment. The hedjot milamala. But a hedjot, we'll say in this case, a hedjot means what? A regular Kohen prepares clothing from the top, Bradelis. They matami lekrovim, and we'll say neither of them. And the Kohen Gadol doesn't have the ability to go ahead and matami even for his clothing, even for his immediate relatives. Musar ala b'siva, and the Kohen Gadol can only marry a b'siva. Va'asar ba'almana, and he cannot marry. Kohen Gadol can't marry an almana. Umachzir harotzeh, and a death Kohen Gadol ultimately again allows the rotzeh to be here on the cut. Umakriv onei. Kohen Gadol could go ahead and offer up karbanos even when he's in Onen. Once again, Aninos is the period between death and burial. Ve'eno ochel. We'll say even though he could offer up a karban during the time of Aninos, he can't eat of that karban during that time. Ve'eno cholik, and he doesn't receive a portion of karbanos offered during the time of Aninos either. Makriv chelik berosh, v'nolta chelik berosh. We'll say if Kohen Gadol has to offer a karban, he's allowed to cut the line.
right? He can go ahead and offer first, but not the I will say, and again, he is permitted to take his portion of any carbon before any other kohen. And he wears 8 different garments. And I will say again, the entire avodah of Yom Kippur is only kosher with him. Or it's only going to be done. I will say first, why line your days and days. I will say ultimately again, if he inadvertently rules regarding, we saw this a couple of days ago, regarding if he erroneously rules regarding something to do with the Beis Hamikdash and laws of Tumah. So ultimately, again, he is potter. Potter means he doesn't have a special carbon on that. The chulan noagim b'meruba begadim. I will say the truth is, all of these items, all of these requirements, which apply to a kohen gadol who is anointed to Shem HaMishcha, also apply to a kohen gadol who is meruba begadim, with one exception, chutz mipara maybe akala mitzvos. We'll say for one thing, which is a special power that is brought in a situation where the kohen gadol permits something that is perishable by kares. Only a kohen gadol who was anointed with oil brings that power. The kohen gadol who is meruba begadim, who is anointed, we'll say, through putting on the vestments of the kohen gadol, does not bring that power. Kula noagim b'mashiach shavar. I will say all of these halachos of the kohen gadol also apply to what? To a replacement kohen gadol who is now out of a job. Right, you're basically going to once the original kohen gadol comes back, so it's called Mashiach Shavar. Chutz mipar Yom Kippur and Basira Seifa. The exception again, the Har Yom Kippur and the meal offering. The chulan inu noagim for Mashiach Milchama. I will say none of these things apply to the kohen gadol who was anointed for the purposes of war. Chutz mehei devarim ha'amurim b'parsha. The exception of 5 things which are stated in the Torah, namely, lo porei v'lo porei. If he suffers the loss of a close relative, he does not allow his hair to grow. Right? Nor does he tear his clothing. The clothing, you cannot become coming to his relatives. He dressed an ayah b'suba, and he cannot marry an almana. And he has the ability through his death, ultimately to what? They will say ultimately again, the kohen mashiach milchama, his death does not allow Yirotzeach to come back home. So also my focus of Yirotzeach Chachamim about whether or not the death of the Mashiach Milchama allows Yirotzeach to come back. The high, you might have Shimon. So say, how do you know ultimately this reflects you the Shimon? Amanatapa, man Shabbos they done Pantal Torah Torah. Who was going to send before? That the Merub Begadim is Pater are Torah Torah, which the Gemara said that's Rabbi Shimon. But Chutz Mehei Dvar HaMurim Bash. So remember again, the Bryce had just said before that the kohen mashiach milchama is considered to be all of the halachos that we discussed by the kohen who was mashiach b'shem HaMishcha do not apply to the kohen mashiach milchama, with the exception of 5 things. So those are the 5 things that we just mentioned. Namely, again, he doesn't let his hair grow, he doesn't get his clothing, he doesn't become coming even to close relatives, he has to marry a b'sura, and he can't marry an almana. So we'll say, so says the Gemara, where do you know this? Right, the kohen who is greater than his brothers, Zach Kohen Gadol. What's it? First the Kohen Gadol. Asher Yitzak al Rosh Hashem HaMishcha, who's you will put oil on his head. Yeah, Mashiach Milchama. What's it? This is the first. What the kohen was anointed for war. And literally again he shows his hands. He's going with the what's the first and special kohen of Kohen Gadol. Zem Meruba Gadol. What's it? This is the first ultimately again to a kohen becomes Kohen Gadol by putting on the special vestments of the Kohen Gadol. Akulan Omer Lo Sholo Yifra Megadav Lo Yifra. We'll say that all of these comments, so whether you are a Kohen Mashiach Milchama, right? Whether you are a Kohen Gadol, Mashiach Milchama, or Meruba Begadim, the halach is the most that
folks, look at this decision. This might be the most athletic name. It is the most athletic person we've ever seen. Look at this athleticism, bro. You know how athletic this motherfucker is? This motherfucker is so athletic that they put his motherfucking sculpture on the auditorium, bitch. Why? Why the fuck not? What's an auditorium? It's whatever the fuck you want it to be, baby.
That does not apply to any of our other Kohanim Gadol. Even though all of the Kohanim Gadol,
Worst
you have a number of people called the Kohen
stream
Gadol. There's the Kohen Gadol,
ever.
then there's the Kohen Mashiach Milchama.
This motherfucker is perfectly imperfect, bitch.
All of these people have Kohen Gadol status.
Look at this athleticism.
They all have the pretty much the
Folks, look at this athleticism.
You might just bring up the exceptions over here. The halacha l'maisa again for hakravas only ba'aninus. For the ability to offer up a korban while in a state of ba'aninus, that only applies to the kohen, who is anointed with oil, not to the other kohanim. I might have thought the Gemara says, maybe again the halacha is after you choose ba'aninus. Maybe also only the kohen gadol anointed with son of Mishka Shaknaya B'Suba. Maybe the other ones don't have to. I'm a little more 50.
Branded.
All of them in the din of B'Suba. Kitharai, and what's in reality, women is my focus on who you should have Sulayika, what's in the positive said, you shall marry women to the Suba. After simply they can cause of Riba, after the Torah goes ahead and makes a list between them, the Torah includes all of them, Dibra Yishmal. Also, after the Torah makes a distinction between the various types of Quran and Yidolim, the Torah once again groups them all together in the obligation to marry a woman who is in the Suba. These are very small. Kiva Omer Imi Ela Sha'ara Machmas Kayom. Machmas Mumin Minayin. What's this? I only know. What's this? That's the moment. Rashi says over here. Rashi says, Avar Machmas Mumin Minayin. Kavalomar Bahu. Yakido Avar Rishon Machmas Mumo Asra Ba'amana. So I only know. Maybe the first part of this. So the Gemara says over here as follows. I only know. Rabbi Kiva says, Imi Ela Sha'ara Machmas Kayom. But even if a Kohen Gadol cannot work as a Kohen Gadol because it was, let's say, at a seminal mission. Even during that time when you can't go ahead and work with the Kohen Gadol, I still know there's a prohibition from Tanayin Amana. How do I know Machmas Mumin Minayin? How do I know that even if a Kohen Gadol, let's say, has some type of significant mourn, which renders him unfit? We're going to discuss this more in depth in just a moment. How do I know that he still can't marry an Amana? Kamalomar Vihu. It was in the positive sense of the rule, which tells us that even once he's in the state of a Kohen Gadol, he cannot marry an Amana, he can only marry a B'Suba. Let's say, this is the follow to the next question. B'amine Rabba, Rav Nachman, Mashiach shenitztara mahu ba'amana. Most of this is discussion. What happens if the Kohen Mashiach, the anointed Kohen, he got saras? So the obviously gets saras, he cannot function as the Kohen Gadol. Obviously, he can't go into the service with saras. So say, what's the shayla? Mahu ba'amana. Can he marry an Amana? Can he marry an Amana now that he can't serve as a Kohen Gadol because of his saras? Can he marry an Amana? I will say that this might be a short-term marriage once he's healed. He can't, so he can be married. So, but the Maisa, the period that he has saras, he's permitted to be married to an Amana. So he was do we say that once you were the Kohen Gadol, I said then what? Remember again, we saw it before that once the Kohen Gadol, that's status. Where do you see that? Remember again that even after he's no longer the operating Kohen Gadol, if he accidentally transgresses, he still brings the power. It's the right to cover on the Kohen Gadol. So do we say mitchadafi? Once Kohen Gadol, always Kohen Gadol, and therefore again, even if he can't actively serve, he cannot marry an Amana. Oh, niftar kosher. Or we'll say maybe again no, because the prohibition to marry an Amana is a function of being an active Kohen Gadol. Once you are set aside from being a Kohen Gadol because of your saras, you can marry an Amana. Go have a day. Let's remember again, Rabbi asked this shayla of Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman didn't know. So what happened? Didn't know how many Yasir, not Papa, to come up from Kani Baile. So then Rav Papa was sitting and he's asking this question. Amralei, Rav Nachman, Rav Papa. Because this is what happened. Rav Papa was asking this question.
Unless you're in South Australia. There's fucking shoelaces are fucking risen.
I only know ultimately a Kohen who was instrumental in the obligation to marry B'Suba, or actually prohibition to marry Amana. I only know that even if a Kohen is disqualified because of the similar mission, the prohibition of only marrying obviously still applies. Other Machmas I know Rabbi said that even if a Kohen is disqualified from service because of his mum, that Rabbi said the prohibition upon marrying certain women still applies. Kamalomar Behu, the word Behu means what? Behu Yishad Yisrael means that he is always in his status of a Kohen Gadol. Even if he can't actively serve in that office, Behu, he is the Kohen Gadol, and therefore even if he has a mum and can't actively serve, he can only marry a B'Suba. So Papa asked the pastor, Papa didn't know either. Una answered the question. This is so beautiful. So come Nashke Breshe, that Papa got up and kissed Una on his head. The Yohev laid back and gave him his daughter in marriage. That's it. So such a beautiful, beautiful Gemara. I'm sure, of course, it's called the reference the resume, but the nice after he did that, he went ahead and gave him the kiss, and he gave him his daughter. So let's do another mission. Kohen Gadol, we'll say, remember again, we need reference to it's actually very fascinating. Kohen Gadol pouring milamato v'hegos milamala. Most of the halach is that Kohen Gadol goes ahead and pouring milamato, which means what? Tears his clothing. In the event that Chas V'Shalom is a loss, he does kriya on the bottom of his clothing, the hegel milamala. But regular Kohen could do kriya on the top. Kohen Gadol matriboni, a Kohen Gadol could go ahead and offer up a carbon even in a state of animus, below all health, but he cannot eat it. He can offer it, but he can't eat it. The hegel will matriboni below all health. So a regular Kohen can't offer it and can't eat it. Can't offer it and can't eat it. Tomorrow. Alright, lamata, manish, lamala, manish. Listen, what does it mean when the Kohen Gadol does kriya on the bottom and the Kohen Gadol does kriya on the top? So we'll say Rav says that literally again, it means the bottom of the garment and the top of the garment. We'll say bottom of the garment would mean like by the hem, right? And top of the garment would be ultimately again by the neck, by the neck. So you want to Shmuel says no. Lamata means we'll say below the neckline. We'll say kind of see like a t-shirt. So the neckline, I don't know what's the right technical term. Like the shirt like on a t-shirt. Like the neckline is like reinforced. Right, John? So we'll say so. The Gemara says Shmuel says lamata means below the reinforced neckline. What is it? Hiking the booster. So the typing so very so very hard the typing. So but right below the neckline. When Gadol, let's go work backwards. The Kohen Hegel right? When he cuts kriya for a loved one, he cuts kriya at the neckline. They cut the top of the garment. That's lamala. Lamata means when Gadol cuts not at the neckline, but rather in the garment itself. What's the top of that? Because when you cut the garment itself, then what happens? The hair might not necessarily be visible. So it's a machlokas ultimately is lamala mikamei safa. The Zeb is Zeb itself. So it's a machlokas Rabbi and Shmuel. Ultimately, again, where we are actually cutting. Are we cutting ultimately? What does lamala lamata mean? Rav says lamata means really at the bottom of the garment. That's where the Kohen Gadol was cutting. Lamala means top of the garment. That's where the Kohen Hegel was cutting. Shmuel says no. Lamala means at the neckline. That's where the Kohen Gadol. That's where the Kohen Hegel is cutting. And lamata means what? Lamata means below the neckline. That's where the Kohen Gadol is cutting. They say, I call him when Rasa Madra coming stop at the low. You know, Madra coming stop at the low. We'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up and match with this next day tomorrow. Go ahead.
But I guess never underestimate the power of some internet sleuths because they'll find everything. So Reddit immediately spoke out on his Instagram saying the winner was apparently not happy with his truck and turned around and sold it the next day. Hey, I mean, I love V8s, but getting more badass V8s on the road, I wouldn't really say it's like a noble cause. But also painting this dude as the bad guy who sold it to make a quick buck makes Brandon kind of look like he's completely innocent and had no idea. But the fact is, it ended up for sale in the city that his manager lives in.
Alright, well, good morning, such a slow sponsors continue on. In such stories being by taking all of our sponsors today. Annual commentator sponsor for Top Shin Day as well. We come from very so. Dedicating all the things also this year in Swiss. The sort of fellow and commentator sponsors for the month of Elul. Involving the fellow Ben Colbert. Now, yes, in the summer of his father, Adam Ben Ashafin, Ashafin, Rafa, Vega, Rachel, Bas, Severs, Rafa, and Hope. Zivos. But you will all probably swell for the answers and the answers. Commentator sponsors fellow showing the beginning to Uri Mishma, Travis from father, Arab Yitzhak, Ayu, Ben HaKavar, and Yaakov, Sipono, with Rafa, and the Hindi sponsors for today, Davin Shenko, the creation of the Yarchek Ashina's grandmother, Rachel, Bas, the representative of our commentator, all of the Nisham Tagnami, the families in the fellow, all those who will travel to the Tom Israel. Also dedicate our learning in the schools of high crisis graduate children of terror attacks in Ramos, 4 country soldiers killed in the attack on the armies in Gaza City.
So doesn't matter about how we're we should provide money for all the good practices and should give those families a tremendous income. Should the Nurse Hashem bring our hearts to this home, should allow Holy Soldiers to be successful in Homa, Shayjan, should give Klavi Yisrael the most elusive bracha, the bracha that has evaded us for the last 2,000 years, which is the bracha of Shalom. Should shower us with the soul of Shalom, should allow us to dry all of our tears, comfort all of the widows and all of the orphans and all of the Almonis, all of the broken parents who are going to be attending so many different revivals today. It was really overwhelming to think about. But again, our avoda, keeping their Hashem to our hearts to move Klavi Yisrael forward, how the Shamas and Chayas, just rebuilt in Hashem to usher in the unending era of the service of Klavi Yisrael. This is that let us begin. Today's daf is daf Ches. We are picking up the Mirz Hashem. Okay, we're picking up the Mirz Hashem on. Picking up on. Anyone else? Yeah, there you go. Let's get it all done.
Are you fucking serious?
On daf Ches. So Mirz Hashem, we are actually on Zayin on the base at the Mishnah. So the Mishnah says also. So a lot to do today. So today we've got a lot of drush, Baruch Hashem, really some very interesting. The nice part about today's daf, well, there are many beautiful things about today's daf. No one is just tolerant. It's beautiful.
They got this motherfucker talking about building a play place in Jerusalem.
And not really a lot of machlokas, which is good. A lot of like derivative sources.
Really?
How we get to
What is he bitching about? Doesn't have
pretty much, not pretty much. It's what you get. Right? In other words, that's in the halal. And then the Mirz Hashem will kind of explore out about how we arrive at that particular, how we arrive at that particular conclusion. Good. So let's say with that, let's go. So Mishnah Zayin base. Ein chayavim ela al helam davar u'shigdas ma'aser. So let's remember again, this is the concept that we've seen being enforced over and over and over. Now, also, one of the things to keep in mind is if you notice, we're vacillating a lot of halachos, right? As opposed to the first parak, which was pretty much all about the erroneous psak of the basis, right? That's what it was all about. We begin to see again, second parak, started really again with the halachos concerning the Kohen Gadol, so now threw in a little bit of Nasi, and then we also goes back afterwards to the discussion about the base. So now the Mishnah begins. So remember again, in general, base din is only chayiv a par helam davar minat tzibur. If what? If there's two things, because this was yesterday's daf that we reinforced over and over and over. What do you need? You need helam davar. Helam davar means a mistaken psak, and we know all the attendant details to that. What kind of psak? A psak that uproots a detail in a mitzvah, but not what? Not a mitzvah in its entirety. Okay, so you need helam davar in shigras ma'isa. Shigras ma'isa means that halacha l'maisa, then there is accidental activity based on that erroneous psak. Okay, that same halacha applies to a Kohen Gadol. So a Kohen Gadol, that a Kohen Gadol is only chayiv his par if what? Helam davar, erroneous psak, shigras ma'isa. Difference between the Kohen Gadol, remember again, and the Beis Din. Just keep in mind the observation yesterday's. What was the difference? Beis Din paskins for who? Klavi Yisrael. Kohen paskins for who? Kohen Gadol. Good. The Rabbi follows same thing by Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah ultimately again what is only liable in a situation once again where there's heaven davar and shigras ma'aser. Everybody said, why is the Mishnah saying that? And remember, Avodah Zarah gets its own carbon. There's a seer. So you would have thought that because the carbon is different, also the criteria is different. It's not. It's the same thing. It's always heaven davar, shigras ma'aser. The erroneous psak followed up ultimately again by inadvertent accidental action based on that erroneous psak. Says you want to know, where do you know this from? It's on Rabbanon. Yishku. So most of the pasuk says Yishku, they will go ahead and they will make a mistake. Right? They'll make a mistake. Let's show the pasuk is in call that's when they Yishku. So it's not about a Yishku Yachol Yechayav al Shigras Ma'isa. You might have thought that maybe there's liability just for accidental action without helam davar. Tamalomar yishku v'ne'elam davar. Ein chayavin ela al helam davar m'shigras ma'isa. Okay, so we'll say therefore halacha l'maisa you need both helam davar, erroneous psak, followed by accidental activity. The Chelik Mashiach, so too by the Kohen Gadol. We know this from the Sid, the Ashmas Ha'am. Hari Mashiach Itzivo. We saw the drasha yesterday. That the Torah itself equates me Ashmas Ha'am, the Ashmas Ha'am, which is an additional phrase, equating ultimately again the halachas of the Kohen Gadol with the halachas of the Tzibor. Below ba'avodas kochavim ela al-halam davar shiras myself. So we know that from Rabbi say that the same halacha applies to Avodah Zarah. That namely again only chayav for Avodah Zarah, both erroneous psak, inadvertent activity. First one line, the Fishias Avodas kochavim, and the Yatzma. Since Avodah Zarah is unique, why is it unique? Because remember again, it has a seer to different kind of carbon. So I might have thought, I might have thought that you be chayav just if there's accidental activity, even if there's no erroneous psak. So what's exer shalav ene? Also we saw this in yesterday's daf. Just like again by par halam davar min hatzibor, you require halam davar with shiras myself. Afkan, so to by Avodah Zarah, Afkan in chayav and ela halam davar shiras myself. Okay, incredible. V'ilu Mashiach ba'avodas kochavim lo katani masnisim lo katani. Interestingly enough, the Mishnah doesn't make mention of the Kohen Gadol by Avodah Zarah, which the Gemara says masnisim money. Who's it being the Zer Mishnah reflects? Rabbi Isanya Mashiach ba'avodas kochavim. Rabbi Omer b'shirigas myself. The Chachamim Omer b'helam davar. So what's it? This is very interesting. So it turns out that there is a machlokes by a Kohen Gadol who makes an erroneous, who accidentally does Avodah Zarah. By accidentally does Avodah Zarah. Rabbi says the Kohen Gadol is chayiv for his unique carbon by Avodah Zarah, even without an erroneous psak, just accidental activity. That's the sheet of Rabbi. And the Chachamim say no. In order for the Kohen Gadol to be chayiv, his carbon, his unique carbon for Avodah Zarah, there has to be both helam davar and shirigas ma'isa. The shavin shebesira, both agree that he will bring a seer. The shavin she'nei asham taloi, and both agree that under no circumstances does a Kohen ever bring asham taloi. Remember again, what's an asham taloi? I ate a piece of meat, and the piece of meat may have been chelef. So a Kohen Gadol does not bring an asham taloi. We'll discuss. We're going to show the truth of that. The tizbara is donokar shegas chatos mikatani. Now again, does the Mishnah make any mention ultimately again of the donokar shegas chatos? Does make any mention that the criteria for this is an avera which unintentionally is kares, unintentionally chatos. Elatani ha who adin laha. Hachanani tani ha who adin laha. So the point we're making over here is the Mishnah defining all pieces of information. Rather, the Mishnah says something and understands that by saying A, it also includes B. My time with the Rabbi. So we'll say, what's Rabbi's logic? Let's jump back for just a second. Rabbi said that halacha l'maisa. Kohen Gadol is chayiv his seer for Avodah Zarah, even without helam davar, as long as there's just shirigas ma'isa, accidental activity. Where does Rabbi get that? The people are pointing out nefesh hashageges bechata bishkada. So the Gemara says hanefesh, that refers to the Mashiach. That's the Kohen Gadol. Hashageges, that performs accidental activity. Zenasi, that refers to the king. Zenasi bechata bishkada. Rabbi Savar chet ze bishkada yehei. Rabbi says, in order to create liability for Avodah Zarah, all you need is accidental activity. Rabbanan savi mi shechatasa bishkaga yotzam Mashiach shein chatasa bishkaga ela behelam davar. So Rabbanan saying no, it only refers to someone. It only refers to someone whose only responsibility is when he performs the shogeg. This excludes the Mashiach, Kohen Gadol, where there's only liability if there's helam davar together with shiriras ma'isa v'shavim, and both agree sheb'seira kiyachid. Ultimately, again, that he offers up a vote offering just like an individual. No, from Damakram, the nefesh achos echad. Sorry, the nefesh achos echad yachid ve'echad nasi ve'echad mashiach u'v'mdeklar nefesh achos. All of them are included in this phrase nefesh achos. And then for all of them open up or offer up the seer for Avodah Zarah. Says the Gemara, says before we go on, in that machlokes Rabbi and Rabbanon and Rabbi and Chachamim, ultimately again we passing like the Chachamim. namely again, that in order for the Kohen Gadol to have liability for Avodah Zarah or for anything else, for his unique carbon, what has to happen? Helam Davar and Shiridas Maisu. That's how we pass. You always need two. Beis Din needs both of that criteria for Par Helam Davar Min HaTzibor, and ultimately again, Kohen Gadol requires both of those criteria for his personal liability as well. Papa Kas Ire Shavin Shemini Asham Tali Naran. But everyone agrees that a Kohen Gadol doesn't bring a Nasham Tali. Where do you know that from? The Ksiv, the keeper of a Kohen Ashir Gasa Asher Shagad. Pasuk says that ultimately again the Kohen will find atonement Ashir Gasa Asher Shagad for the shogeg that he was shogeg. It would be competitive. Rabbi Savar. So Rabbi says this refers to someone who the entirety of his sin is shogeg. What does this mean? This comes to someone who's chayav Hashem Talui, only someone whose liability is fully wrapped up in the commission of an act of shogeg. But someone who requires another level, like the Kohen Gadol, who also requires what? Helam Davar. Such a person is not subject to Hashem Talui. So the Gemara says, Kol Ksiv, does the pasuk say Kol? Does it say Kol? So the Gemara says, in the Inke Nichtav Asher Gasa. Look, did I say Asher Gasa? Lama li Asher Shagag. Why does it say Asher Shagag? Hakmar Shmaran. Ba'adika Kol Chet Ol Bishkaga. To teach you who is liable to Hashem Talui, someone whose complete liability is engendered by the commission of an act of shogeg. Yasa Mashiach she'ein kol chet ol bishkaga ela ba'avodas kafavim. It says Ella the Helam Davar im Shiridas Ma'isa. So let's say so. Essentially, to distill this down, the drasha is as follows. Who is chayiv ultimately again in Hashem Talui? Someone whose complete liability is contained in an act of the shogeg. But if halacha l'maisa again, doing something the shogeg is not enough. For example, a Kohen Mashiach, a Kohen Gadol, or again, just the act of the shogeg is not enough. Rather, what does it mean for liability? Right? He needs what? Helam Davar, a mistake in Psach. So the person is not subject to Hashem Talui. So when it says Shechata, what does that mean? It's a Mashiach Shechata Bishkaga. Lo ba'avodas kofavim. The Mobashar mitzvahs ela behelam davar shiridas ma'isa. And Rabbi will agree with that as well. So remember, because everyone agrees that a Kohen Gadol ultimately again is not subject to shiridas ma'isa. I'm sorry, it's not subject to Hashem Talui. So we'll say, so therefore, takeaway message from this self-contained sugya is that halacha l'maisa, both Beis Din as well as Kohen Gadol only have liability for their unique karbanos. So you remember, in both cases it's a par, except by Avodah Zarah where it's a sayur. The liability only comes about if halacha l'maisa, again, there is both Helam Davar as well as Shiridas Ma'isa. Furthermore, and again, Helam Davar, mistaken Psak, Shiridas Ma'isa, accidental activity based on that Psak, and everyone agrees that ultimately neither the Beis Din nor the Kohen Gadol are subject to Hashem Talui. Incredible. Mishnah in Beis Din Chalav Achiyoru B'Darish has Dolo Pares V'Shiridas Ochafas. So this is interesting. Actually, we've been helpful to have this Mishnah a little bit earlier on as well, which is what type of Aveira, right, are Beis Din liable for, right? So the Gemara says it's not any Aveira, it's only type of Aveira where intentional commission of the Aveira would result in Kares, and unintentional commission of the Aveira results ultimately in Chatas. So Mezid is Kares, Shogeg is Chatas. B'chinu Mashiach. So too the same criteria by the Kohen Mashiach. V'lo ba'avodas kofavim achiyoru al davar shezedono Kares b'shiridas kasel Chatas. The same halacha applies to Avodah Zarah. So we'll say, so therefore, just to give an example of this, you know, if Beis Din Paskin, or the Kohen Gadol Paskin, they're Jalati Tasman. Like, and they go and probably sell so there's no power Helam Davar Min HaTzibor for the Beis Din, and there's no power for the Kohen Gadol. Why? Because the punishment for eating chazer, it's a lie. It's lawless. It's got to be something where the stakes are much higher. So therefore, so the only time that there's this liability for the power for Beis Din and the power ultimately again for Kohen Gadol is the type of Aveira where intentional commission is Kares, Unintentional is katos, same Bible. Says the Rabbi, where do we know this from? We sign your Rabbi Omer Ne'emar Kan Allah V'Ne'emar La'alon V'Ne'emar La'alon Allah. It says over here Allah V'Noda HaChatas Asher Chatu Allah. So that's Par Helam Davar Minat Tzibor, and this is interesting. The other Allah site is by Arias. It's by Arias. V'Isha El Achosa Lo Sikach Yitzror Legalos Ervasa Aleha B'Chayeha. The prohibition to marry two sisters. Fascinating, right? So it says Allah over here by Par Davar Minat Tzibor, and Allah by Arias. What's the connection? Mama Alon Davar She's a Donor Card Shri Nasa Katos. Just like I said by Arias. Intentional commission ultimately again is kares. Unintentional, like accidental commission of arayas, is going to be a chatos. Afkan sotu by param of minat tzibor called Afkan davarshis don't kares v'shivivas of chatos. Incredible. Also, what a fascinating limud. So Gzir Shava out explain everything. So just Allah. There's Allah by param of minat tzibor. Allah by arayos. Just like by arayos. Intentional violation kares. Accidental violation is katos. So to par is only brought for kares, katos, prohibitions. Incredible. Ashketon tzibor. Fine. So now I know that's part of the tzibor. Mashiach Nigavan. How do I know that the same criteria applies to coin jugglers? So the Gemara says, "La'ashma sa'an hari Mashiach tzibor." As the pasuk says, ultimately again, "La'ashma." Remember again. What's interesting is we're always using the same maneuver. Once I know something applies, like Par Halam Davar Minat Tzibor, then what? That extra phrase by coin gadol, "La'ashma ha'am." What is that? What is that? Because remember again, the coin gadol is not asking for the populace. Who is the coin gadol asking for? Who is he asking for? Himself. So what is that? The ashma sa'am? All is coming to link the process. Whatever is the process for the am, i.e., Par Halam Davar Minat Tzibor based in, is the same process for the coin gadol. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says, "Yashma sa'am hari Mashiach tzibor." The Gemara says, what about Nasi? Where do it's true for the king, for the Nasi? Yomit, mitzvahs, Sid, Gabi Nasi, the Asa Akas become mitzvahs Hashem. So when Nasi it says, if he performed one of the mitzvahs, really means he did only Averos. But with Tzibor, the Asu Akas become mitzvahs. And again, so the Zir Shava mitzvahs from Nasi to the Tzibor. Tzibor, Davar still a Davar, so she does Chatos. So just like by the tzibor, it's only liability for the power. If it's a type of avera that intentional violation is kares or intentional violation is chatos, Nasi, Davar is a double kares, she does so chatos. Beautiful. We'll say it's like a symphony. It's like an orchestra. Right? And everything, all the notes come together so incredibly beautiful. So they'll say, so three-pronged Russia. So remember again, Mishnah is teaching me a rule. What's the rule? Based in is only chayiv par davar tzibor, Cohen only chayiv his part in a situation ultimately again where again for an avera, intentional violation is kares, unintentional violation is chatas. Where do we know this from? So for the tzibor, zir shabbat, Allah, to arayos, intentional violation kares, unintentional violation chatas. So to again, based in is only chayiv for the part, kares, chatas. Then Ashma Sa'am ultimately allows me to learn out Kohen from the Bezdin. And what about Nasi? Nasi ultimately again is learned out from the Gzir Shava of mitzvahs from the Am. Incredible. So the Gemara says, V'yachit. Yachit Amakra, your nefesh. The however, this applies ultimately again to a yachid, to an individual as well. Ultimately, the parts is the nefesh, and ultimately again we can learn out tachton from onion, learn out a lot of psukim ultimately again from the earlier drushes. It's incredible. So seeing Allah also applies also in a avodah zarah. So to by avodah zarah, there's only going to be liability if they pass in regarding something again which intentional violation is kares, unintentional violation is katas. So the Gemara says, by the way, the Yochid piece means Karakara. Rashi points out over here, Yochid means Simaidiyah. An individual only brings a carbon chatos for an avera which is done intentionally carries liability of kares and unintentionally carries the penalty of chatos. Right, that's ultimately again, but I say it differently. An individual only brings a chatos when he inadvertently violates an avera that is subject to kares. So it's simple. Good. So the Gemara says, "Shalom called the Baals, called the Halos by Baals, Zalabal, the Pishas, Halos called the Liban, the Atzma." So in general, Avodah Zarah is singled out, kind of be reckoned on itself. Because remember again, Avodah Zarah has a different carbon, has a seer as opposed to a par. So Avodah Zarah has been singled out to be judged on its own. You might have put on some Avodah Zarah, you should be shy for everything, even if it's not kares. So the verse never can me'inei, never lahalon me'inei, just like by the Beijing. Davar says the donor kares should go to chatos. Again, Beijing when you try the power for something that intentional violation is kares, unintentional chatos. After social by a Avodah Zarah, Davar says the donor kares should go to chatos. Incredible. So ask the Chatzibah. So I understand now that's true for when the tzibur is doing Avodah Zarah. Yochid, Nasi, Mashiach, Minavan. How do I know that these halachos concerning Avodah Zarah applies to all these other individuals as well? Because the Pasuk says, the nefesh achas. The nefesh achas. Echad, the nefesh achas, right? Echad Yochid, the Echad Nasi, the Echad Mashiach. Kulan b'chlal nefesh achas. Fascinating. So let's say, so Russia, nefesh achas teaches you the same halachas that we went ahead and applied to the tzibur also applied to the achas, to any singular personalities. Who are the singular personalities you're talking about? The Kohen Gadol, the Nasi, and some regular individual. The Yimel Tachton Min Ha'elyon, and ultimately, again, furthermore, we can go and learn out the latter subjects from the earlier subjects, from the earlier psukim. Sami Chalaman Dematik Lei. So it says, remember again, all of this begins with what? All of this begins with Xer Shava between Par Halam Davinat Tzibur and Arayas. And Arayas, Aleha. So the Gemara says, Sami Chalaman Dematik Lei Lala Xer Shava Kidamra. So this works well if you accept the initial Xer Shava, right? Everything is both the initial Xer Shava. And Rabbanan Dematik Lei La'aleha La'arayos. It's Saros. Dover Shavase, but here's the problem. But Rabbanan use Aleha for something different. What does Aleha teach us? So let's say, back to your Rama states. Back to your Rama states. I know, for that might should be like the trigger word. Right? So let's say, so remember again, if you remember, one of the interesting things is that you begin with Sekasi Bamas. Let's say, what happens if Reuven is married to multiple women and he dies? There may be a direct correlation between those two facts. Right? So let's say, so ultimately, again, he's married to multiple women, he dies. And now let's say again, it happens to be that, let's say, one of his, and he has a brother. Let's say it happens to be Reuben married his niece, which is Mutter, right? Which is when he marries his niece. So now what happens? So now the two wives fall to Reuben's brother Shimon for Yibum. Reuben, obviously, Shimon came to Yibum with his daughter. So what's now Rachel? Once he came to Yibum with his daughter, it patters all of the tongues, all the co-wives from Yibum as well. So that Rabbanan learned out that halacha from Allah. It's a more involved Russia. So here's the issue. The Rabbanan use Allah for something else. If that's the case, then where do they learn this concept that there is only based on liability for an infraction that if done intentionally is kares and unintentionally ultimately is kafir? Where do they learn that out from? Where do they learn that out from? So the Gemara says, not the little, let's say first my line, meet the master in the Shobin of the Greg. As a result of the Torah Abbas, Yalochem, Lo'ose Bishtado, Vanefesh Shesheta Asa Biyad Lama. So literally, again, the Prophet says there's one Torah for one who commits an Avera inadvertently, and one who goes ahead and acts intentionally. So let's say, what do you see from here? Now it's interesting, it says Torah Achas, and this is talking about idolatry, right? So the entire Torah is compared to Avodah Zarah. Just like by Avodah Zarah, you only chayiv right for an act, you only chayiv the seer for something that done intentionally is chayiv, unintentionally is chatas. So too again, by other situations as well, namely by Param Dav Minatzibor, Hayabin Avzol Koris Ashigos Chatas. In general, Ashkef on Yakin.
Back up north.
That tells you personal liability. Nasi Mashiach, Nasi Mashiach, Bein Bavos Kam Bein Misham Mitzvos. See, right? Bein Misham Mitzvos. See one minavan. Yom Al Yom Itachton. Okay, so once you have it already by Yakin, ultimately again, we can apply to all these other contexts. Rabbi, I'll give you a Shabbat maybe my other day. What does Rabbi do ultimately with the same way Yeshua ben Levi? As once Rabbi Shabbat maybe again as far as the different Rasha, it's a very schematic way to Kinsanya. Rabbi will use Rabbi Shabbat maybe Rasha for a different reason. So interesting enough, when it comes to Avodah Zarah, there's a distinction between if an individual worships versus if a larger group worships. What's the difference? Number one, interesting, wrapping beside Ramonim of it. Let's say if you have, so for example, if you're in a Dakas, city that worships idolatry, what do you do with it? They're killed by the sword and their property is destroyed. Right, their property is destroyed. The Gemara says, "You did the skila, umamonam kala." If an individual worships idolatry, what's the halacha? Number one, he's killed with skila, and number two, we don't touch his property. We don't touch his property. So you want to you're called nachlok the kavanah saying, you might have thought that their kabbanos are distinct as well. Some of them are Torah achos yidiyah. So this is what Rabbi goes ahead and uses the drasha for. Even though halacha l'maisa, their punishments are different for a rabbi versus yachid worship idolatry, but ultimately again their carbon is the same. Masking for a the reason is because the pasuk itself makes no distinction. But if there was a distinction about I would have thought to make a distinction as well. So the Gemara says, my naisi. Well, if you make a kavanah distinction, what else would be brought instead of a seer? So the Gemara says, naisi par. If you're going to bring a par, they can't be tzibor b'shar b'sas with the naisi. That's the Gemara says, no, but the tzibor already brings a par for other others. Obviously, the Torah is singling out of Avodah Zarah, but that means that Avodah Zarah has to be unique. So how would it be unique? You're going to bring a par that makes like all the fractions. Nice see par the all those sirakatos, maybe over 2 things. Apart from all the sirakatos, Sibor ba'avodas ba'chav would be nice. Ultimately, again, the Gemara is talking about that Sibor already brings for Avodah Zarah. Nice see seer. Nasi b'shar mitzvahs with the nice. If you bring a seer, the nasi already brings that by other fractions. So the Gemara says nice see seera. Maybe you should bring a female sheep. And when it says Yashik Nami Hainu Karbano, ultimately again for Yaki, you also bring a carbon. It's just Karakamina, Sibor Maisi Kardiola, Usia Lakatos. It was like if the Sibor brings, ultimately again, apart from all the Sir for a Katos, Hani Naisi maybe this in this situation, even just the opposite. A Kardakatos and Sir Lolo, Inami. Sarif ve'ino takana. If that's the case, you could have said it requires a distinction, but there's no way to really make a distinction. Kamash Malon, I'm also going to halakha l'maisa again. Torah Achas is Kamash Malon, Torah Achas. The Maisi call Echad Sirat Yachid. Kamash Malon say when it comes to Avodah Zarah, interestingly enough, everyone brings the same carbon. It's fascinating. Everyone is bringing a seer for Avodah Zarah. Whether you are based in Canela, right, Dinasi, the Kohen Gadol, or Yachid, everyone is bringing the same carbon ultimately again for the fraction of Avodah Zarah. Incredible. The full Avamiyah Kik Sibi, Hani Krabah, Hamudik Sibi, and what's interestingly enough, one thing everyone is agreeing on is that these two that we mentioned are by Avodah Zarah. My master, how do you know? Maybe could be a person. The pasuk says that he says ultimately again, if you will make a mistake, if you will go ahead and ultimately again shogeg, right? You'll go ahead and you'll make a mistake. You'll make a mistake below Sas. That's Komitzah Sa'ila. Hazel Mitzvah, Shishkul Komitzah. What is the mitzvah? What is the mitzvah here? You mean Ahela. Right? But what is the mitzvah that is the equivalent of the entire Torah? Avi Omer, Zila Bonas Tokot, Mitzadachi. So let's say it makes sense. Because remember, Avodah Zarah represents a fundamental negation of the Rish for that Kadosh Baruch Hu. The entire point of mitzvahs
is the creation of a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So therefore, by definition, it's saying like, what is in Avera that ultimately, again, is like uproots the Torah's entire view? It's Avodah Zarah. The Gemara says, the day Rabbi Tana Amar Pra, Asher Diba Hashem Al Moshe, Uksiv Asher Tziva Hashem Aleichem Biyad Moshe. So it says, the Pasuk says, this is what Hashem spoke to Moshe, and then it says, this is what Hashem commanded you beyond Moshe. Either the mitzvah, shehi b'dibur shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, v'tziva al yidei Moshe. What's an example of a mitzvah that ultimately was stated by Hashem, but was also commanded to us by Moshe Rabbeinu? What's a mitzvah like that? Havi Omer, Zu Avodas Kohav. It's idolatry. Because we also remember again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one who said the first two divros, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am Hashem your God, do not have any other gods. So on one hand, HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself told us the prohibition of idolatry, but yet it is reinforced multiple times by Moshe Rabbeinu. The Tana, that ultimately the first two Dibros were talked about Israel. Just as in a song. If you think about this in general, both times, why is it that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, at the end of the day, so maked on Avodah Zarah? Right? Think about it just a moment. This is actually pretty profound. We only heard two things from God in the history of man, right? In the history of mankind. Man only heard God speak two things. What were the two things that man heard God speak? Right? I am Hashem your God, and do not have any other gods. Right? So the only thing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu ever told us was, don't worship idolatry. And the prohibition reinforced most often in the Torah is, don't worship idolatry. What's the pshat? What's the pshat? HaKadosh Baruch Hu jealous? Like he's jealous, he doesn't want us seeing other gods. I said, he doesn't understand the simple beauty of it. What does HaKadosh Baruch Hu value most in this universe? What does the Ribono Shel Olam? Right? It's almost like, what do you get? The God who has everything. What do you get there? What does Hashem value most in this universe? Relationship. That's what he values most. And by the way, I want to point out, it's fascinating. It's not just even for honest relationship with us. Because who else has a prohibition of idolatry? Who else has it? Shem is B'nai Noach. But what Baruch Hu says to humanity is what I value most is a relationship with you. That's what it's about. That's what it's about. The mitzvahs, everything else that we have, these are details to create and engender a relationship. And who says that's why we want to keep about idolatry over and over, because idolatry fractures the relationship. Idolatry distracts from the relationship. What I want most with you in this universe is relationship. And I will say sometimes we miss this detail in our Yiddishkeit. We become focused on the details. The details are important. It's not the devil in the details. The divine is in the details. I need the details. You can't be a Jew without the details. You need the details. But it's important to understand what the details get us. The details get us relationships. And the greatest challenge of our Yiddishkeit is you could be the most proficient behavioral Jew and yet have no relationship. All of Yiddishkeit, all of Elul, is all about reestablishing that relationship. That's why Chazar's over Avodah Zarah over and over and over again, because he's just yelling and screaming out us. All I want is a relationship with you. And all I want you to want is a relationship with me. Incredible. So the goes right there. The Rabbi Yishmael Tana. There's no touch on those 7 days. The Rabbi Yishmael Tana. Hashem b'halod do'asechem. Ezer hi mitzvah shenemra b'tchila. Which ultimately again was the mitzvah that was stated in the beginning. Havi omer zovos covered. Ultimately, again, first mitzvah that Hashem said to us was idolatry. 1 second. Esther mitzvahs to Sadu Gemara. Yet we're told that there were 10 mitzvahs that were commanded to us in Gemara, and Mara was before Har Sinai. Yifsid b'yom shal tishul kashal hagefa. Elu mechaberta kiddushim yinei. Rather, I would say the initial drasha that we spoke about seems to hold a little bit better than this last drasha that we made. Okay, let's say incredible. Says the Mishnah. In chayav and ela aseva avos hashem shemukush. So we'll say interesting halacha detail over here. One which actually takes us back a little bit to
our Shavuos days. This is the beginning of the Sefer
Omri
Shavuos.
also had a son.
So remember again,
His daughter married
Mishnah says as
Yehoshaphat,
follows,
his
an
son.
interesting carve-out.
He married
There
up
is no
to
liability. There's no liability. And remember now we're grouping all this together. Har Helam Dabaminat Tzibor, Har Kohen Gadol. There is no liability if the erroneous ruling was made regarding assays and los assays of the Mikdash. Now, what are the assays and los assays of the Mikdash?
Omri married his son Ava
So, for example,
to Izebel.
if the Beis Din
This was the beginning of a very
made
unhappy
an
story.
erroneous ruling, and they said you're allowed to go into the Beis Hamikdash in a state of tumah. I don't know, if you touch the chariot, you're allowed to go into the Beis Hamikdash. Now, both saying, I remember again,
Back down south,
interesting enough, tumah and tara in the
Yehoshaphat
Beis
had become king.
Hamikdash, under certain circumstances, can be
Yehoshaphat followed in the followed
so it actually fit into the previous criteria. But Allah, for reasons that we will see, Allah said, Beis Din or the Kohen Gadol, tasking regarding what we call Tumas Mikdash V'Kadashav, which means anything to do with Tumah in the Beis Hamikdash, there's no power. Ein Medin, the Gemara says, Ein Chayav Ela Aseh Ala Aseh Shemidash, Ein Medin Asham Talui Ala Aseh Ba'alos Aseh Shemidash. Furthermore, you don't bring an Asham Talui regarding an Aseh and Los Aseh dealing with Tumah in the Mikdash. Aval. But Allah says again, you will be chayiv, ultimately again, a par for an aseh lo saseh. Let's say when it comes to nida, that's an example. Umevim asham tali ala aseh lo saseh shebnida. And we'll say, Allah says, you bring an asham tali for me. Let's say a man has relations with his wife, and she's a suffix nida. Suffix nida. Ultimately, you're going to bring an asham tali. Eiza mitzvah saseh shebnida. What's an example of a mitzvah aseh by nida? Harosh min hanida. So we'll say, we'll see that halacha rice partially means that a man has to separate from himself from his wife when she's in nida. Now, the halacha will say not only when she is in nida, but even ultimately again in the interval approaching the onset of her nidos, he also has to separate. Or mitzvahs lo saseh, al kabal anida, mitzvahs lo saseh, but we don't have relations in nida. Says you know not immediately. So we'll say, we don't know this. We're not immediately. We see one of the chaydi carbon, ma'ala, the yafid asham talo inanida. So we'll say, the Gemara asked the Shaila, from where ultimately again do I know this? That halacha myself. Rashi says, Shum carbon ba'olam al v'makom chatas kavua. How do I know that halacha l'maisa, the only time that there is liability is when normally the prohibition is generated chatas kavua, although this is about being nemar ba'ashem, the chatas to ba'ashem talui. He says ba'ashem, that there is liability both by a chatas and asham talui. The nemar ba'ashamot b'tzibot, ma ba'ashem b'yochid, the chatas kavua, just like ultimately again, the Hashem by Yah is talking about a case where there is definitive chatas liability. The Hashamot Tzibor, the chatas kavua. So to the Hashamot by Tzibor is talking about a situation where there's what's called a chatas kavua. Umat Tzibor, the chatas kavua. Asham Kavua Nami, Ein Ba Ella Asafik Chatas Kavua. So let's say, so we actually saw this from the previous sugya, that the Asham Kavua only comes about in a situation where if there was definitive knowledge, there would be what we call the Chatas Kavua. Ihati, covered over the already Nami. If that's the case, ultimately, again, we shouldn't be high the cover over, which is a variable carbon, which we'll discuss. Hatmar says, Haksiv Baya Kiyasham Na'achatz Neila.
But they're sitting together.
Done in Asham Yashamot, being done in Asham Min Yasham. So most it's interesting enough, the reason for that is because the Shabbat doesn't work because the words are not similar. The Gemara says, why do you need to make the Shabbat from exact words? The Shabbat again, this is talking about Saras Habayis. It's Saras in the home. Trying to equate the process ultimately again of when the coin checks. Initially, when it comes back to check, and the Gzera Shabbat is based on the Shabbat coin, the Ba'at coin, even though what? The words are dissimilar. So you see somewhere you can make a Gzera Shabbat based on dissimilar words. But oh, Neila Pnim Ba'ashem to Asom Midash Sarat Shabbat Sid. But you make Ba'ashem, on the Ba'at says you have done him Ba'ashem in Mitzvah Hashem, Min Ba'ashem Mitzvah Hashem. When we can make a Gzera Shabbat, when there's a choice, we can make a Gzera Shabbat ultimately again between similar words versus dissimilar words. we will always go ahead and go with the similar. Right? Why not go ahead and make a Gzir Shah from those two? Donin v'ashim mitzvahs Hashem asher lo siyasena, v'ashim mitzvahs Hashem asher lo siyasena. So it's halacha l'meisa. Those are two exact phrases, and therefore halacha l'meisa we never learn out from that. Shmias kol, shmias kol. Ubitu sasai b'tumas mikdash v'kadashot. Shelo ne'emar b'hen Hashem u'mitzvahs Hashem asher lo siyasena. See if I will say halacha l'meisa. We're essentially establishing the criteria or idea of Shabbat between the context which have these phrases. Hashem, u'mitzvahs Hashem, asher lo siyasena. If you have those three, ultimately, again, we can create the halachic bridge. But it's important to understand that ultimately, Shmias Kol, Bitu Sasai, and Tumas Mikdash V'Kadashot do not share those phrases, therefore we cannot make the Gzir Shabbat. So I'm not sure I'm saying I'm I don't want to go to the bottom line, what's the takeaway? You're like, no idea. Right, what's the day? So this is why I mentioned this in the Mishnah. The good thing is, remember, no one's arguing on the Mishnah. As the Mishnah said, it is exactly halacha. All the Gemara can try to show us how the Mishnah arrived at its conclusion. Halacha l'maisa, fascinating part. That's Rabbi says. So by the way, just so you understand, just remember, if you want to chazir these dapim, the good news is just chazir the Mishnahs. Just how you chazir the Gemara also. But again, the Mishnahs tell us everything we need to know in these sugis. And this last piece, whereas up until now we've been focusing on this idea that in order for them to be liability, there's not a passing regarding something where intentional violation is a chatos, intentional violation is kares, unintentional violation is a chatos, there's a carve out. What's the carve out? It's basically passings regarding anything what we call Tumas Mikdash V'Kadashah. Remember, get back to what's Tumas Mikdash V'Kadashah? They paskin erroneously either about something to do about Tumah of the Mikdash itself or Tumah of the individual entering into the Mikdash. If they go ahead and they paskin erroneously in one of those areas, there is no Halam Gavra Minat Sibor. That applies to the Beis Din, and remember again, the already established whatever is going to apply to Beis Din is going to apply to Nut, it's going to apply to the Kohen Gadol, and ultimately going to apply to a Nasi as well. What is that based on? It's based on the criteria of the Gzir Shava of Mitzvahs Hashem, Asher Lo Tiasena, and the Hashem. Ultimately, Tumas Mikdash V'Kadashah does not have that phraseology, therefore, not included in these halachas Yerosai.
Disciple Elisha took over. So now Yoshafat went to Elisha's home and he became very humbly.
Sorry for the pace. Have a great day, everyone.
Took off his royal garments, dressed himself as a commoner, and came humbly to Elisha, asking him to go to war against Moab. Elisha assured him of victory, and they went to battle. And they were victorious over Moab. But unfortunately, the troubles weren't over. A combined force of Edomites, Moabites, and Philistines marched on Jerusalem. And Yehoshaphat was very afraid. They came, these allies came, these enemies came as far as the Dead Sea, so they're getting close to Jerusalem. And Yehoshaphat realized that there was nothing he could do. The combined forces were too strong to resist. And he proclaimed a day of fasting and prayer. All the people of Judea streamed to Jerusalem, from every town, from every village. They came and they joined together in the holy temple of the Beis Hamikdash. And Yehoshaphat stood in front of the congregation and he
implored God to save them. Good morning. Let's begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's shir.
The prayers were answered.
I need to come to this one.
A true prophet of Hashem
dedicating all the shul instructions to this year's schools for the Soros and the staff and third sponsors for the month of Abu Amin and Tova Medical
soldiers were
now Yisrael Shabbos parents Abraham Ben
marched
Ashur
into battle singing, praising
God
and when they got there they found nothing but
tefillos of our Gila and all of those problems will be answered in this month and the month.
the Philistines
Surely
and
we
the
will
Edomites,
Nishmas David from his father, Rabbi Ari from Yitzchak Aryeh Ben HaChavra Yaakov Tzipor Rabba. Our Dafyomi sponsors for today, Alan Meirowitz, wishing a happy birthday, a happy 22nd birthday to his wife Sue. Okay, wonderful. We're going to make sure that he hears that. Baruch Hashem, incredible. May you have continued good health and nachas from your children and grandchildren. Beautiful, beautiful. Amen. And Sa'id and Simhekin in honor of birthday of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, graduation of the Yahrzeit of Said's father, Moshe ben Bashi Yaakov, which is on this coming Friday in Yahrzeit Hashem. We hope that America Torah. All of the Neshamos Avin Aliyah, the families in the Chama, all those leaders who have been there, the Kol Yisrael, the Shlosh Hashem, bring home our hostages, the Shalom and the Karov, allow our holy soldiers to be successful, the Chol Maaseh Yedei. I want to say, of course, it is important for us to take a step back and to reflect that today is September 11th, the anniversary of the worst terrorist attack on American soil in the history of this great country. And those of us who were alive, those of us who were here that day, those of us who remember that day, remember the mix of emotions, the fear, the uncertainty, and then the incredible moment when that paved the way to beautiful unity, beautiful achdus, and a sense of shared mission and purpose to really bring light to a world that was filled with so much darkness. We saw the worst of humanity on September 11th, and then in a response, Baruch Hashem, to all the first responders, through the bravery, through the heroism, through the incredible courage that people had to rebuild afterwards, we saw the best of humanity. And it brought us together, and it caused the war. We went to war afterwards to try to stamp out evil in faraway countries that most of us never even heard of before. And I think it's important that this year, we forgot that it's overwhelming then that yesterday, September 10th, we see an act of political assassination. And whatever the circumstances around Charlie Kirk's assassination, a horrific event of a 31-year-old father of two. I don't care what his political affiliations are, what his political views are, who he was as a commentary, who he was as a friend of the president. It's irrelevant. But the fact that an act like that, a barbaric act of cowardice, can happen right on Erev September 11th. It feels that unfortunately, as a country, as a nation, we have not yet internalized the lessons of how hate rips us apart, how hate tears us apart. There's clearly so much work that we have to do as a nation. As Jews, obviously, our collective heart beats in Eretz Yisrael, but we are privileged to be citizens of this great land, which has given us so much and afforded us so many rights and opportunities. And it's heartbreaking sometimes to see the chaos that feels like society has descended into. Granted, it's the actions, hopefully, of just one person who doesn't represent anything else. But sometimes when things occur in your home, it is reflective of what is happening. Like when your children go to school and they act a certain way, you get a phone call from the teacher, little Chaim, little Ricky, went ahead and said this word. So then you have to wonder where they hear that word from. Or they act in a certain way, where do they hear that word from? This happened in our home. This happened in our home. And as a result, it's going to behoove us to engage in this season of introspection, to engage in tremendous national introspection, to understand what are we doing as a nation. And in the aftermath of September 11th, we saw the best of our people, the best of this nation. Remember the images? We saw police officers, firefighters, first responders running into collapsing buildings to save people they did not know. We saw people digging through rubble for days and weeks afterwards in a hope to find survivors. We felt the tremendous unity afterwards. That was the best. That was the best. The best of the United States of America. And then what we saw yesterday, whatever it is, whatever the narrative is the worst. Is the worst. Is the worst.